Chapter 446. With scruples in their hearts, they were no longer fearless. Most young people looked down on those mediocre middle-aged people. Little did they know that these middle-aged people were just like them back then, fearless in life and fearless in death. Chunxi's fear did not originate from his heart, but from the outside world. This was because he had already become a middle-aged man from a young age. He had a lover, a child, and a family of his own. He was the sky of this family, the umbrella of this family, and the pillar of this family. So, shouldn't he be afraid? If it was in the past, Chunxi would definitely continue to study the soul mirror. He would even try to erase the mark left behind by the grand pure divine ancestor and turn it into his natal magic treasure. But now, such thoughts did not appear in his mind at all. After all, Chunxi was already old. Back to the spectacular 9-star alignment, which could be called a space wonder. Under the push of the soul mirror, the 9 planets quickly converged into a straight line. From afar, it looked like a cannon was in place and ready to fire at any time. The 9-star alignment lasted for about 2 minutes. During these 2 minutes, Chunxi's mood was as tense as a string. He was afraid that the 9-star alignment would affect Earth, so he raised his essence, energy, and spirit to the highest point early on. If anything strange happened next, Chunxi would rush back to Earth immediately and take away Nian, Ying, and everyone else he cared about. He might not be able to stop the 9-star alignment, but it would not be easy to hurt his family in front of him. Chunxi had already prepared for the worst, but he did not expect. What happened next was completely different from what he had imagined. The 9-star alignment did not have any destructive impact on the solar system. The only thing that was affected was the large net of laws entrenched in the periphery of the solar system. He saw, the moment the 9 stars gathered, the large net that contained the unknown power of laws began to flicker faintly. If the 9-star alignment was a key, then the large net of laws was a door. All he needed to do was insert the key into the keyhole and twist it gently. This huge net of laws that had shrouded the solar system for over 10,000 years slowly loosened. The stars moved, and all living things were in the universe. The 9 stars returned to their positions, and the laws disappeared. After the invisible power from the soul mirror disappeared, the 8 planets and the degraded Pluto began to revolve in their original orbits. This rare spectacle of the 9 stars alignment was like an unreachable mirage. Apart from making Chunxi worry for a while, it didn't leave anything else behind. After a flash of white light, the soul mirror reverted back to its previous dull and lifeless state. At this moment, the large net of laws that made even Chunxi's heart palpitate completely vanished. Chunxi frowned as he looked at the distant Oat Nebula. That was the boundary of the solar system, and also the boundary between the solar system and the universe. He vaguely felt that he had accidentally triggered some sort of mechanism, so he could not help but want to go to the Oat Nebula to check it out. But after thinking about it, in the end, Chunxi suppressed the throbbing in his heart and flew towards Saturn's ring with the soul mirror in hand. The people from Celestial Capital were still unconscious. Once they woke up, these people would inevitably yearn for their former home, which would bring a huge impact to Earth. Chunxi did not want any external forces to interfere with the self-development of Earth civilization. So he set up a large formation on Saturn's ring and imprisoned all the refugees from Celestial Capital in the formation. This was only a temporary measure. Ying had not woken up yet, and Yin was still waiting for him at home. So why would Chunxi waste too much time dealing with the refugees from Celestial Capital? It would not be too late to come back and clean up the mess in Celestial Capital after he dealt with the problems at home. Therefore, after hurriedly setting up the formation, Chunxi headed straight for Earth without looking back. Yin, I'm back. Chunxi did not know that at the same time he set off to return to Earth outside the distant Oat Nebula. A wooden boat was rushing into the Oat Nebula at an extremely fast speed. The Oat Nebula was made up of trillions of comets. Compared to it, the small wooden boat suddenly looked extremely small, like a microorganism under a microscope. 2 teenagers of 15 or 16 years old sat on the boat. One of them sat at the bow, holding a magic weapon that looked like an oar in his hand. Every time the teenager waved the oar, the wooden boat would suddenly rush forward tens of thousands of miles in an extremely strange way. Changhua, what are you doing? The teenager sitting at the stern was busy cultivating, so he did not pay attention to the direction the wooden boat was heading. At this moment, he looked up and found that the surroundings were full of comets of different sizes. He was so scared that his face turned pale. He quickly grabbed the corner of the teenager's clothes and shouted, "This is the Tianshu ruins. Do you want to die? Turn around. Turn around. I don't want to die here with you." Hearing this, the teenager called Changhua seemed to have gone crazy. He did not care about his companion's dissuasion. Instead, he waved the oar in his hand wildly, so that the speed of the wooden boat instantly increased by 30%. Seeing this, the teenager sitting at the stern was not willing to wait for death. He immediately raised his hands and directly launched an attack at the teenager who was driving the boat. The boat of friendship really capsized so easily. Changhua seemed to have expected this. Seeing that his companion was attacking him, he did not panic at all. He directly used the oar as a weapon and fought back. The two of them were about the same age, so their cultivation was naturally similar. Therefore, while Changhua was dealing with his companion's attack, he still had time to laugh and said, "Ifei, didn't you always say that the universe is so big that although you can't see it all in your life, you have to set foot in 2 or 3 places? The Tianshu ruins are right in front of you. Don't you want to go in and have a look?" Hearing this, the teenager called Ifei's face turned cold. He said hatefully, "The Tianshu ruins is known as an ancient forbidden area. Anyone who trespasses will die. Do you really think that these legends are only used to fool 3-year-old children?" "Ha ha! Are you afraid?" "Of course I'm not afraid of you." The teenager was arrogant to begin with. How could he endure such ridicule from his companion? Therefore, Ifei no longer showed mercy. He directly drew his long sword and fought with Changhua. The two of them fought back and forth, but they did not notice at all. The wooden boat had already gone deep into the Oat Nebula. When the wooden boat rushed out of the Oat Nebula, the two of them suddenly felt that their eyes were wide open, so they could not help but stop what they were doing. "This is the Tianshu ruins. We're actually here." The two teenagers stared blankly at the solar system in front of them. Even the daring Changhua was shocked at this moment. The reason why Changhua dared to drive the wooden boat close to the Oat Nebula was because he knew the power of this cloud-piercing shuttle. One had to know that this cloud-piercing shuttle was his father's most important treasure. It was personally made by a supreme being, and its speed was extremely fast. When the host was in danger, the cloud-piercing shuttle could even instantly turn into a defensive treasure to protect the host. This was also the reason why Changhua dared to go close to the Oat Nebula. He just wanted to scare Ifei. Who would have thought that the two of them would actually break into the legendary Forbidden Area without any hindrance? The Tianshu ruins? Chapter 447. Generosity should be rewarded, and arrogance should stop the youthful heart. According to Earth standards, Changhua and Ifei were still underage. However, relying on their extraordinary cultivation base, these two brats, who were still wet behind the ears, were actually more courageous than most people. They didn't understand how they could enter the Tianshu ruins so easily. However, after confirming that it really happened, even the cautious Ifei didn't complain about going back. Instead, he became excited. The boat of friendship started moving again. The two youths squeezed at the front of the boat and watched the cloud-piercing shuttle enter the solar system at an extremely fast speed. There was no fear of the unknown in their eyes, only a strong yearning for the ancient legends. "Changhua, it's better to be careful. Rumor has it that the Tianshu ruins are the cultivation grounds of the ancient Almighty. Although there may be great opportunities hidden inside, there are also hidden dangers. Our cultivation levels are still low. Without this cloud-piercing shuttle, we wouldn't even be able to roam the stars freely. If there's some kind of formation on this planet, we'll probably die here today." As he spoke, Ifei pointed at Pluto, which was not far away. Pluto was only 1/3 the size of the moon. From afar, it didn't give off any sense of visual oppression. Dwarf planets like Pluto were extremely common in the universe. However, Pluto was inside the Tianshu ruins. Therefore, even though the two of them had roamed the stars since they were young and were used to all kinds of dangers in the universe, they didn't dare to approach it at all. Therefore, the two of them drove the wooden boat around Pluto, and after making sure that there was nothing worth exploring, they quickly sailed to the next planet. In reality, the solar system was like an egg. The sun was the yolk, the space where the 8 planets were was the egg white, and the outermost Oat Nebula, which was covered with trillions of comets, was the eggshell. The dense comets floated around the solar system, so the situation inside the solar system couldn't be seen from the outside. And this was in the eyes of outsiders, Tianshu ruins. For the immortal cultivators in the outside world, the Tianshu ruins were like a dried-up treasure trove. According to ancient records, before the Tianshu ruins were sealed, it was once a holy land for cultivation. Even the glorious jade, clear grotto heaven was once only one of the inheritances in the Tianshu ruins. Of course, the Tianshu ruins back then was not called the Tianshu ruins. Instead, it was called Tianshu realm. Later, for some reason, the Tianshu realm, which was at its peak, suddenly declined. Then, an ancient almighty set up a heaven and earth formation, completely isolating this galaxy from the outside world. Under the protection of the formation, no one could approach the Oat Nebula. In the blink of an eye, tens of thousands of years had passed. Everything about the Tianshu ruins gradually faded from people's minds as time passed. It wasn't until a few years ago that a brilliant genius appeared in the jade clear grotto heaven that the Tianshu ruins returned to the public sight. This genius had cultivated for less than 1,000 years, but his cultivation had already stepped into the ranks of Empyrean. Because of this, he was known as the #1 cultivator below the Supreme Realm. He even had hopes of becoming the next Supreme Headmaster of the Jade Clear Grotto. But it was a pity. However, this young celestial lord was crazy for some unknown reason. He actually wanted to use the method of exploring the Tianshu ruins to make his name resound throughout this supreme palace enclosure. Yuan read? Yuan, as in broken and ruined walls. Luoyang was known as the ancient capital of 13 dynasties, but after 2,000 years, it had become a third-tier city. The Tianshu ruins had been quiet for more than 2,000 years. Tens of thousands of years had passed. The immortal cultivators in the Supreme Palace enclosure had long forgotten its former glory. This Tianshu realm master wanted to use the Tianshu ruins as a stepping stone, but he never expected, in front of the sun, moon, and stars formation, he was like a moth to a flame. He did not even cause a spark before he turned into a wisp of smoke and disappeared from the world. This was also the reason why no one dared to approach the Oat Nebula. The young man did not know the immensity of heaven and earth. He was not afraid of the slightest thing. Thus, the two daring brats piloted the cloud-piercing shuttle and hurried in the direction of Earth, back to Chenxi. After imprisoning the people of Tiandu in Saturn's ring, he rushed back to Earth. Shangjing City, which he had not seen in a long time. The courtyard, which he had not seen in a long time. It was late autumn. The old locust tree in the courtyard had already shed its leaves. The withered leaves were piled up on the bluestone floor. When the autumn wind blew, a few leaves drifted out of the courtyard. It was not the courtyard that was deserted, but the people's hearts. Chunshi did not like this feeling. Thus, he frowned and looked around the courtyard. After confirming that his restrictions were not damaged, he immediately waved his hand and used his supreme cultivation to forcefully reverse the flowering of the plants in the courtyard. In an instant, it was as if spring had returned to the earth. Hundreds of flowers bloomed. Even the old locust tree in the courtyard suddenly grew lush green leaves. Accompanied by the overflowing fragrance of the flowers, Chunshi strode toward the west wing. It was now 4 o'clock in the afternoon in Shangjing. Yin was not at home. Qin Yongyan and the big cat should be waiting for her at the school gate. Thus, in a huge courtyard, There was only a fish that could only roll its eyes all day long. Chun, she pushed open the door. Qin Ruoying's figure came into view. A year was enough time for the brand-new quilt to be dyed a little dark yellow. However, it did not leave any trace on Qin Ruoying's face. She lay quietly on the bed as if she was asleep. Chun, she came to the bedside. After smoothing out her hair that was messed up by Yin, he gently held his lover's hand. Ying, I'm back. I'm sorry I've kept you waiting. As she spoke, Chun, she took out that damned broken mirror from her bosom. This was the first time he looked at a magic treasure so carefully. It was as if he was not looking at himself in the mirror, but Qin Ruoying in the mirror. This was a Khanate treasure. Not only did it involve the soul of Xiannu, but it also involved the great formation of sun and moon and stars. Thus, Qin did not dare to activate it lightly. He had found the soul mirror. Ying had not woken up yet. So what was he waiting for? Chun-Shi hesitated for a long time. Then, as if he had finally come to a decision, he gently kissed his lover's forehead. Then, he silently sat cross-legged next to Qin Ruoying. He prepared to let his soul enter the soul mirror again. Then, like last time, he would imbue the soul mirror with vital essence in order to activate it. This time, whether it was the explosion of the sky or the 9-star alignment, he must bring Ying's soul out. Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heavens Divine Emperor Mobile Version website. Chapter 448. Chun-Shi hesitated for a long time before he finally came to a decision. He planted a gentle kiss on his lover's forehead before he sat down next to Qin Ruoying with his legs crossed. He was prepared to let his soul enter the spirit mirror again and infuse his inner energy into it to activate it just like last time. This time, whether it was the explosion of the heavenly capital or the 9-star alignment, he had to bring Ying's soul out. It was fine when she didn't go home, but when she got home and saw that her lover was still lying quietly in bed, Chun-Shi's heart suddenly felt very uncomfortable. He was very upset because he had failed to protect Qin Ruoying. After all, for a cultivator who had reached the Dongshu stage, what was the point of cultivating if he couldn't even protect the woman he loved? Even if I lived forever, I would be nothing more than a soulless zombie without you by my side. Therefore, Chun-Shi was like a tortoise eating a scalpel this time. He was determined to rescue Qin Ruoying's soul. Even though he knew that activating the spirit mirror might lead to some unexpected things, he was not willing to wait any longer. He had waited for a long time. Ying had also waited for a long time. He couldn't live without his lover, and Yin couldn't live without her mother. This family couldn't live without a mistress. Therefore, after Chun-Shi made his decision, he immediately infused his inner energy into the spirit mirror without hesitation. When he gave it his all, his inner energy was as vast and mighty as the Yangtze River, or as endless as the surging Yellow River. As the incomparably dense inner energy flowed into the spirit mirror, a strange white light suddenly lit up on the surface of the spirit mirror. Seeing this, Chun-Shi immediately held his breath and entered the white light again using the method of astral projection. It was still the same strange space of consciousness. However, after Chun-Shi entered, he suddenly realized that there were many subtle changes in this place. There were even some colors. One had to know that the space of consciousness was like a universe that had yet to be developed. Consciousness was an inexplicable and inexplicable thing. There was no concept of dimensions here, so the 5 senses were naturally useless. Everything could only be felt by the heart. As a result, everything he saw, heard, and even touched here, in fact, it was just a manifestation of one's inner consciousness. Therefore, theoretically speaking, there would not be any changes in the space of consciousness because it did not have a proper form to begin with. But the strange thing was, this time, however, Chun-Shi's feelings were completely different from last time. In his perception, this originally chaotic space of consciousness seemed to have been split open by Pangu's giant axe at this moment. There was a sky here, and suddenly there was a land. There was a dim yellow aurora in the sky and a dark green Styx river on the ground. Chun-Shi was now standing in the middle of the river Styx. The river was not deep, barely reaching his knees. Chun, she was a little surprised by the changes here. After carefully sensing for a while, he suddenly realized that the souls that had previously filled the entire space of consciousness had now all turned into fish in the river Styx and were constantly rushing forward with the river Styx. Seeing this, Chun-Shi could not help but frown as he walked forward along the river Styx. He did not know how long he had walked. Only then did he finally find that familiar fluctuation of divine soul again. It was still that weak fluorescent light. Ying-Ying's soul was there. Chun-Shi immediately ran toward the fluorescent light. However, as he got closer and closer to the fluorescent light, Chun-Shi's mood became more and more serious, because he suddenly realized the fluorescent light was at the end of the river Styx. Thousands of souls were following the river Styx and pouring into the fluorescent light. After realizing that something was wrong, Chun-Shi's heart could not help but skip a beat. He thought that something had happened here. Therefore, he did not even have time to think. He immediately used his soul to wrap around the fluorescent light and try to bring it out of the soul mirror. However, the strange thing was this fluorescent light seemed to have taken root in the space of consciousness. No matter how Chun-Shi tried, the fluorescent light floated there quietly and did not move at all. After all, Chun-Shi was now an immortal cultivator at the Dongshu stage. Even if he had left his physical body, his soul should still be extremely powerful. However, no matter how hard he tried, the fluorescent light did not move at all. After a few fruitless attempts, Chun-Shi was instantly enraged. After hearing a wild roar, an extremely strong golden light suddenly erupted from his body. Then, this golden light was like the sun rising from the east, instantly illuminating half of the space of consciousness and completely enveloping the fluorescent light. At the same time, Chun-Shi's reckless behavior seemed to have affected the river Styx below. As a result, the river Styx suddenly dried up. Countless souls were like startled birds, instantly turning into soul bodies and flying out in all directions. The chaos had not even split, but it was already so severely injured. How powerful was Chun-Shi's soul? What had entered the soul mirror before was only a wisp of it. But now, Chun-Shi wanted to completely separate his soul from his physical body and pour it all into the soul mirror. He wanted to use his soul to build a soul bridge that connected Qin Ruoying to the outside world, and use it to forcibly bring her out of the soul mirror. Fortunately, the soul mirror was now an ownerless object. Otherwise, Chun-Shi's violent and barbaric actions would definitely cause the soul mirror to suffer a backlash, and his soul would definitely be severely injured as a result. Desperate times called for desperate measures. Chun-Shi did not care so much now. In any case, he had to take Ying-Ying's soul away today. Thus, under his continuous efforts, the fluorescent light was forcibly pulled out from the end of the river Styx. That's right, it was pulled out. This fluorescent light was like a plant, and it had taken root at the end of the river Styx. After Chun-Shi plucked the streak of light out of the ground with brute force, a burst of intense vibrations erupted from within the soul mirror again. It was the same as before. Tens of thousands of Yin souls were shaken and scattered in all directions. Chun-Shi's soul was like a small boat that had encountered a whirlpool. Suddenly, it was pulled by an invisible force, as if it was trying to drive him out of the soul mirror. But this time, Chun-Shi was fully prepared. Thus, the moment the invisible force appeared, he had already used his soul to wrap the fluorescent light up in layers. Then, like a smuggler who had successfully avoided the security check, Chun-Shi successfully brought the fluorescent light back to the real world. Chun-Shi succeeded, but he did not know that the moment he left the soul mirror with the fluorescent light, the river Styx surged out again. Tens of thousands of Yin souls turned into fish and gathered in the river Styx once again. And at the end of the river Styx, suddenly a ray of fluorescent light appeared. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com, website of thewonderfulbook.com. Chapter 449. Note: I made a mistake when I pasted the previous chapter. If you didn't see my note at the end of the chapter, then it's the wrong chapter. Sorry. The so-called husband and wife were actually Although they didn't have the colorful phoenix wings, their hearts were as one. Therefore, the moment Qin Ruoying opened her eyes, Chun-Shi suddenly realized that there might be a problem. As expected, after Qin Ruoying opened her eyes and saw him, she didn't get up and hug him immediately. Instead, she looked at him up and down with a strange and cold look. Seeing this, Chun-Shi couldn't help but frown slightly. At the same time, he stretched out his right hand to see her situation. But what Chun-Shi didn't expect was that, just as he reached out his hand, Qin Ruoying suddenly leaped up like a carp. Following that, she smoothly executed a set of wrist and arm lock martial arts. Looking at this posture, Ying seemed to want to take him down in one fell swoop. This set of self-defense kung fu was passed down in the Qin family. Although Qin Ruoying hadn't come into contact with kung fu before, she still stepped into the celestial being stage with the help of Chun-Shi. It should be known that celestial beings were no longer in the ranks of ordinary people. It was just a few moves of wrist-locking kung fu. She only needed to take a look at it to master it. Qin Ruoying had always disliked fighting with people. If it wasn't for the fact that cultivation could increase her lifespan, and thus she could stay with Chun-Shi forever, she was afraid that she wouldn't be willing to spend too much time on the road of cultivation. But now, Qin Ruoying, on the other hand, acted as if she had been possessed by Qin Wanqing. The moment she came up, she started fighting without a single word. Chun-Shi was afraid of hurting her, so he immediately dispersed all the strength in his body. As a result, Qin Ruoying suddenly pressed him down on the bed by his arm. A dignified Dongshu stage cultivator was actually pressed down on the bed by a celestial being at this moment. If this matter were to spread, it would only shock people on the spot. Chun-Shi didn't dare to move at all, but Qin Ruoying didn't show any mercy. After pressing Chun-Shi down, Qin Ruoying turned over and mounted the horse directly on his back and pressed him firmly on the bed. At this moment, Qin Ruoying seemed to not know Chun-Shi at all. After pressing his neck from behind, she asked coldly, "Who are you?" Hearing this, Chun-Shi could only tilt his head and ask in a muffled voice, "Ying, you don't even recognize me? I don't know you." After saying that, Qin Ruoying raised her head and looked around. The room was still the same room. She didn't know where she was. She didn't know she was, but she couldn't remember anything. She's teach she to remember anything. Amnesia? Maybe. From the moment Qin Ruoying woke up to the moment she captured Chun-Shi, the entire process seemed to have happened in the blink of an eye. At this moment, Chun-Shi could roughly guess the reason. Normal people might think that this was amnesia, but in reality, this was a sign of a missing soul. It was probably because he forcibly took her soul out of the spirit mirror, so the soul he took out was incomplete, and Qin Ruoying lost her memories. After figuring out the crux of the matter, Chun-Shi's originally tense mood immediately relaxed. It wasn't a big problem, it was just that her soul was missing. At worst, he could go to the spirit mirror later, and the problem would be solved. However, Qin Ruoying's attitude towards him made Chun-Shi, who was used to Ying's gentleness and consideration, suddenly feel like he was enjoying himself. In this world, other than Ying, which woman could ride on his back? Nian was still young, so she couldn't be considered a woman. Qin Ruoying rode on Chun-Shi's back, and her two legs were straddling Chun-Shi's waist. Therefore, the roots of her thighs were tightly pressed against Chun-Shi's waist, and he was firmly sandwiched between them. Although she used a lot of strength, this strength was not even enough to tickle Chun-Shi. Therefore, Chun-Shi was not in a hurry to struggle. Instead, he lay on the bed and silently felt the softness coming from Ying's thighs. TSK, this feeling, it was really bouncy, full, and alluring. He was used to eating a lady from a noble family who was as gentle as water. Suddenly, she was replaced with an ice beauty who was as cold as ice. The taste was simply wonderful. If Qin Ruoying knew what he was thinking, she would probably raise her hand and slap him across the face. Men are all pigs. Chun-Shi was like a dead fish, lying on the bed and not moving at all. At this moment, Qin Ruoying seemed to have realized that her posture was a little indecent, so she immediately jumped up from his body and went straight to the door of the West Wing. Chun-Shi was busy savoring the feeling, and when Qin Ruoying left, It instantly made him feel a sense of emptiness, so he hurriedly got up and chased after her. Ying, don't run around. Where are you going? Seeing that she was chasing after her, Qin Ring turned her head and glared fiercely at him. She had no choice but to hurriedly take a few steps back, and then put on an old face, indicating that he would not go near her. After that, Qin Ring then turned and walked out of the West Wing. When she walked out of the house and saw the beautiful scenery of hundreds of flowers in full bloom, Qin Ring could not help but smile. Ying had always liked flowers and trees, so the courtyard had long been filled with potted plants by Chen Shi. When Shi returned home, he had conveniently changed the flowering period of the plants in the courtyard, but he did not expect that it would come in handy at this moment. Even if Qin Ruoying lost her memory, this hobby did not seem to have changed. Thus, she quietly stood in front of a lily and carefully savored the faint fragrance coming from it. Until this moment, Shi felt as if he had seen the lover that he was so familiar with. Ying was still Ying. She had not changed, and he had not changed either. Qin Ruoying minded her own business in the courtyard, admiring the flowers by herself. Shi obediently waited by the side, feeding the fish in the fish tank from time to time. The two seemed to be strangers, but in fact, there was a faint bond between the two. Just like a young couple quarreling on the street, the girl walked quickly in front, and the guy followed far behind her. Even if the passers-by did not know them, they would immediately realize the two of them should be a couple. They seemed to ignore each other, but in fact, they had been ruthlessly abusing the single people on the street. Yes, this was the feeling. The strange, ambiguous atmosphere did not last long. When she noticed that someone had walked into Dongming Alley, a faint smile suddenly appeared on his face. Calculating the time, Yin should be home from school. I wonder, the moment she saw her parents, what kind of expression would she have on her face? Anyway, no matter what expression she had, that little face would definitely be very cute, right? Chapter 450. In the golden autumn of October, the smell of osmanthus wafted through the air. Whenever it was the middle of October, there would always be a sudden gust of wind in Shanjing. It seemed to indicate that the weather was about to turn cold and that everyone should wear more clothes. The bus stop sign was not at the entrance of Dongming Alley, but at a crossroad 300 meters away from the alley. After the little girl got off the bus, she immediately felt a burst of cold air rush up her back, so she couldn't help but hug her school uniform tightly. Looking at her pitiful appearance, Qin Yongyan smiled as he picked up the little fellow from the ground. Using his own inner strength, he chased away the chill in her body before quickly bringing her to the entrance of the alley. Every day, they would get on and off the bus here on time. Of course, the difference between the little girl and the other children was that in addition to being picked up by her grandfather, she was always accompanied by a study companion and pet, the big cat. When they got home, Qin Yongyan would personally cook for the little girl, and the little girl would obediently return to the West Wing. She would either play with the big cat for a while, or watch TV for a while waiting for dinner. This was the daily routine of the grandfather and grandson pair. Usually at this time, the big cat would quickly jump off the bus roof and then slowly walk behind the grandfather and grandson pair. Similar scenes kept repeating. But the big cat's behavior today was a bit strange. As soon as it returned to the entrance of the alley, it seemed to have discovered something. After lying on the ground and sniffing a few times, it was like a dog, with its tail between its legs. It jumped up the wall and onto the roof. Even Qin Yongyan didn't have time to react before the big cat's figure completely disappeared from the top of the wall. Meow! Then, the big cat started to cry from the other side of the wall. But, as soon as its voice sounded, it was as if something was stuck in its neck, and it suddenly stopped. Qin Yongyan felt that something was wrong. After more than a year of living together, he and the big cat were very familiar with each other. So even if the big cat only cried out softly, Qin Yongyan could roughly distinguish its thoughts based on the pitch of its voice. The big cat's cry was so strange that Qin Yongyan couldn't tell what it meant. Considering that the big cat was different from other animals, once it barked, something must have happened. Therefore, Qin Yongyan quickly carried the little fellow back to the courtyard. Wow, grandfather, how the flowers bloomed. It smells so good. As soon as the door was pushed open, a refreshing fragrance of flowers rushed to the tip of the little fellow's nose. Thus, she hurriedly gestured for Qin Yongyan to put her down and ran towards the Chihuahua gate. It was still the circular drooping flower gate. The little fellow would walk back and forth through this door several times a day. But this time, when she came to the door again, the scene behind the door became a scene that she would never forget for the rest of her life. He saw, inside this door, She was standing quietly in the middle of the courtyard, looking at her with a smile. Qin Ruoying stood in front of the potted plant in the corner of the courtyard. Although she pretended to admire the flowers as if nothing had happened, her eyes couldn't help but drift to the door of the Chihuahua gate. That courtyard, that door, that flower, that person. The little fellow stood outside the door and was stunned for about 5 seconds. She didn't say anything and just looked at her with a smile. He watched as the expression on her face changed from dazed to surprised, and finally into a kind of crazy ecstasy. Daddy, 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 daddy. She opened her small hands and ran towards Chun, she like a spoiled child. At this time, Chun-Shi threw the big cat aside, then quickly stepped forward and hugged her tightly in his arms. The best gift was a hug after a long separation. This kind of hug didn't just come from love. It could also come from family. Daddy, I missed you so much. I missed you so much. Chun-Shi squatted on the ground. The little fellow buried her head deep in his shoulder and then started to act spoiled to him in a muffled voice. Chun-Shi hugged her small body, and his palm unconsciously rubbed her back gently. After not seeing her for a long time, Nyin had grown taller again. With just a casual glance, Chun-Shi knew the exact height of the little fellow. 125, 11 cm. This height was considered above average among children of the same age. According to this trend, Nyin should be like her mother in the future, with a pair of straight and slender legs. Yes, definitely at the level of a supermodel. Although Chun-Shi had been away for more than a year, the little fellow didn't look like him at all. Instead, she was more clingy to him than before. The father and daughter were lovey-dovey for a long time. The little fellow refused to let go for a long time, as if she was afraid that if she let go, Chun-Shi would leave again. When the little fellow was tired of being lovey-dovey in Chun-Shi's arms, her eyes naturally drifted to Qin Ruoying. Mommy, you're awake. As she spoke, the little fellow pushed Chun-Shi away, as if she wanted to run to Qin Ruoying. But at this time, Chun-Shi suddenly pulled her back. Nyin, wait a minute, Mommy has just recovered, and now there's still some sequelae. She can't even recognize Daddy. Just like an injured small animal, if we get too close, we may scare her, and then her old illness will relapse. So you'd better not go over now. Let's give her some space and let her be alone. When Mommy's illness is fully recovered, we'll go out to play as a family, okay? After hearing that Daddy did not allow her to get close to Mommy, the little fellow's mouth immediately pouted. She was still very obedient, so she immediately retracted the leg that she had stepped out. But although she retracted her leg, her little eyes were still fixed on Qin Ruoying. That pair of big watery eyes stared at Qin Ruoying, and Qin Ruoying could not help but frown. The reason why she did not leave immediately was that everything in the courtyard gave her a familiar feeling, and she had no place to go. Even if she had lost her memory, Qin Ruoying still felt that the little girl in front of her was very familiar. This feeling was even more familiar than the one that Chun-Shi gave her. After all, Chun-Shi was only her lover, and this little fellow in front of her was a piece of flesh that had fallen from her body. Therefore, Qin Ruoying just frowned and looked at the little fellow. She stood still on the spot. The little fellow remembered Daddy's teachings, and even if she wanted to go forward, she did not dare to. This strange atmosphere lasted for a few seconds. When Chun-Shi realized that something was wrong, his mind suddenly throbbed, so he softly whispered in the little fellow's ear, Nyin, why don't you go and try? Mommy doesn't know me, but maybe she knows you. Don't worry, if Mommy does anything strange, Daddy will pull you back immediately. Just like going to the zoo to see an orangutan, Chun-Shi carefully reminded the little fellow of the rules of entering the garden. However, he forgot the most important point, and that was Qin Ruoying was already a celestial being. Therefore, if he did not use telepathy, every word that he said to the little fellow would be transmitted to Qin Ruoying's ears. As a result, Qin Ruoying silently watched the father and daughter's performance as if she was looking at an idiot. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com. Wonderful book mobile version website, .com. Chapter 451. The reunion was unexpected. I hope you've been well since we last met. Qin Ruoying heard every word of the conversation between the father and daughter. Although she had lost her memory, it didn't mean that she had lost her mind. So she was very clear about what this conversation meant. In fact, since she woke up, Qin Ruoying had been seriously thinking about everything that had happened in front of her. The reason why she was able to remain so calm and collected was simply because that was her personality to begin with. At this time, although Qin Ruoying didn't wear a sign on her face at all times like Qin Wanqing with the words "keep away" clearly written on it, she still gave people a feeling that it was difficult to approach her. After losing the emotional bond between her and Chun Shi, she finally showed her true self. After all, a woman couldn't just be gentle to strangers, right? This was the Qin Ruoying that Chun Shi knew at the beginning. She was a real goddess. So, she could only be admired from afar and couldn't be touched. Chun Shi didn't dare to get close to her. At this time, the little girl also found that her mother had become a little different from before. So, even with Chun Shi's encouragement behind her, the little girl still refused to take a step forward. Children were actually very sensitive. When a little girl found that her mother looked at her in a completely different way, it was as if someone had poured a bucket of cold water on her in the middle of winter. She was completely cold. It wasn't that she didn't want to, but she didn't dare. Seeing this, Chun Shi had to whisper a few words of encouragement in the little girl's ear. But after the little girl heard it, she still cowered and refused to go forward. Regarding this, Chun Shi couldn't help but have a headache. But at this time, a surprising scene suddenly appeared. Qin Ring, who had been motionless all this time, actually took the initiative to wave to the little girl, as if to ask her to go over. Seeing this, how could the little girl hold back? Almost instantly, she took a step forward and directly pounced on Qin Ruoying. Mother, you're finally awake. I miss you so much. As soon as he got close to Qin Ruoying, the little guy suddenly hugged her waist and buried his head at her waist, acting very coquettishly. At that moment, Qin Ruoying's body clearly stiffened. But then she took the initiative to place her hand on the little fellow's head and gently stroked it. Qin Ruoying didn't know why he was so close to this little girl. After being hugged tightly by her, Qin Ruoying faintly felt a strange yet familiar intimacy. Could it be, am I really her mother? Thinking of this, Qin Ruoying couldn't help but turn to look at Chun Shi. At this time, Chun Shi was smiling from the bottom of his heart because of their reunion. It was fine even if he didn't laugh. This smile made Qin Ruoying's face turn cold. She even began to wonder if she had been deceived by this father and daughter pair. This unique reunion quickly came to an end. Except for the little fellow, Qin Ruoying didn't show any face to anyone. One had to know that there were no outsiders in this house. One was her husband, the other was her father. The two most important men in her life could only stand aside at this moment, looking helplessly at her and the little fellow playing in the courtyard. Although the scene of this reunion might be a little different from what they had imagined, but at least their family was reunited. Chun Shi was back, and Qin Ruoying was also awake. This family, it finally felt like home again. Then, the power of cooking returned to Chun Shi's hands. In order to celebrate this reunion, Chun Shi used all his trump cards. Whether it was flying in the sky, running on the ground, or swimming in the water, everything had to be served on the table today. In short, 9 dishes and 1 soup were served, and everything was to be perfect. The little fellow hadn't eaten Chun Shi's dishes in a long time, so when the first dish was served, she pulled Qin Ruoying directly to their seats and kept yelling for her father to hurry up and serve the dishes. Qin Ruoying didn't stand on ceremony. Although she hadn't acknowledged Chun Shi yet, she didn't feel a trace of repulsion towards this man in front of her. Instead, she felt a faint tug at her heart. She was secretly observing Chun Shi, but she didn't know that her every move had been seen by Chun-Shi. Chun-Shi was very pleased with himself, but he didn't show it on his face. If it wasn't for the fact that his sister-in-law hadn't woken up yet, and he had to go to the spirit mirror again, Chun-Shi even wanted to spend more time with Ying after she lost her memory. Dinner was quite enjoyable. During the meal, Qin Ruiying didn't say a word, so the little fellow naturally became the communication bridge between her parents. Under Chun-Shi's instructions, she kept yelling for her mother to eat. That silly little look of hers made Qin Ruiying chuckle. Qin Yongyin had never liked to interfere in his children's affairs. Seeing that Chun-Shi had returned safely, he could naturally take off the burden on his shoulders. Therefore, after confirming that Qin Ruiying's amnesia wasn't a big problem, he hastily ate his dinner and then went back to his room to shut himself in. After dinner, the sky had already darkened. By the time Chun-Shi finished cleaning up the table and chairs, the little fellow had already pulled Qin Ruiying back to the West Wing to watch cartoons. Chun-Shi hesitated for a moment outside the door. Just as he was about to step into the room, Qin Ruiying's cold voice sounded from inside the room. "Get out." Hearing this, Chun-Shi could only shake his head and smile bitterly. Well, he didn't even have a right to enter the room now. Chun-Shi was really depressed. At this time, the little fellow didn't forget to add, "Dad, you play by yourself." Mom said, "You're not allowed to enter the room. I'll sleep with Mom today." Chun-Shi had no choice but to turn around and walk into the guest room that Xiao Yuan stayed in before. As early as when Chun-Shi left, Xiao Yuan had already successfully entered a multinational company as an intern under Gu Lao's introduction, so the tea house was completely closed. Chun-Shi lay on the bed, thinking about how to reopen the tea house tomorrow, while listening to the movements in the room next door. Although Qin Ruiying lost her memory, she still had a kind of heartfelt care for Ninian. This also made Chun-Shi feel very gratified. Ying was still the same Ying. Although incomplete, she was still the Ying that he couldn't help but be fascinated by. Qin Ruiying seemed to have forgotten how to cultivate, so when the little fellow fell asleep, she silently lay on the side. Chun-Shi was on this side of the wall. She was on the other side of the wall. Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heavens God Emperor Mobile Version Reading Website. Chapter 452. It was night. It was a dark and windy night. Without alerting anyone, Chun-Shi quietly slipped into the east wing from the guest room. After returning home this time, he actually had a lot of urgent matters to deal with. The first in line was Qin Ruiying, then the second in line was, naturally, it was his sister-in-law. Qin Xueqing was lying quietly in the east wing. The furnishings in the room were almost exactly the same as 2 years ago, under the protection of Chun-Shi's restriction. Not to mention thieves, even Wang Chunju could only look at her daughter through the window. Although Qin Xueqing had a bad temper, her heart was still quite soft. She definitely belonged to the type that was tough on the outside but soft on the inside. Therefore, sometimes even Chun-Shi would suddenly feel that his sister-in-law was quite cute. Therefore, even without Qin Yongyin saying anything, Chun-Shi had already decided that he must wake his sister-in-law up tonight. As a result, as the brother-in-law, tonight, under the eyes of his wife, he sneaked into his sister-in-law's room. After all, Ying was his lover, so Chun-Shi didn't need any medium at all. He could directly find Qin Ruiying's soul among the thousands of souls. His sister-in-law didn't have this kind of spiritual bond with him, so Chun-Shi needed some kind of medium to find her soul. This medium was naturally Qin Xueqing's physical body. Qin Xueqing was still wearing the white training clothes that she wore before she fainted. After Chun-Shi pushed open the door and entered, the first thing that came into his sight were the 2 towering mountains. His wife was in the opposite room, but as the brother-in-law, he sneaked into his sister-in-law's room in the middle of the night. Although he did it to do a good deed, this kind of feeling was somewhat strange. Moreover, with Chun-Shi's cultivation, what difference did it make if his sister-in-law wore clothes in front of him? Of course, Chun-Shi was not a lecherous and wretched person, so he immediately withdrew his divine sense, then closed his eyes and came to Qin Xueqing's side. Chun-Shi sat down beside his sister-in-law with his legs crossed and placed the soul mirror flat on her forehead before sending his consciousness into it again. As the saying goes, unfamiliar the first time, familiar the second. With the previous two experiences under his belt, Chun-Shi was already very familiar with the process of entering the soul mirror again. It was still that space of consciousness. But this time, however, the space of consciousness that Chun-Shi saw was different from the last time. Instead, it was like before the chaos was formed. The dim aurora and the green nether river were gone. All that was left were thousands of unconscious souls drifting about in the chaos. After Chun-Shi arrived, the thousands of souls immediately fled in all directions, as if they were avoiding the god of plague. Seeing this, Chun-Shi did not have any suspicions. After he poured his inner yuan into Qin Xueqing's body, a glimmer of light appeared between Qin Xueqing's eyebrows. Then, a wisp of soul flew out from the thousands of souls, then went straight to Chun-Shi's side and began to circle around his soul. Chun-Shi observed carefully, and after confirming that this wisp of soul had Qin Xueqing's aura, he wrapped it with his own soul and brought it out of the soul mirror. After Chun-Shi released this wisp of soul, it directly disappeared into Qin Xueqing's forehead. Then, Qin Xueqing's eyelids trembled slightly. Seeing this, Chun-Shi did not show any joy on his face. Instead, he suddenly frowned, because he realized that the entire process was unbelievably smooth. It was different from when he was searching for Ying's soul. This time, it felt as if the soul mirror had taken the initiative to return Qin Xueqing's soul to him. How could Chun-Shi not find this strange? After all, the soul mirror was a Khanate treasure. Chun-Shi would not be surprised if an artifact spirit was born from it. At this thought, Chun-Shi immediately held the soul mirror in his hand and began to seriously think about everything he saw in the soul mirror. Why was it so easy to find his sister-in-law's soul after he spent so much effort to find a part of Ying's soul? Also, what was the situation with the Nether River? Why did Ying's soul appear at the end of the Nether River? Previously, he had been anxious to find Qin Ruing's soul, so Chun-Shi did not pay too much attention to these details. He thought that these images were just projections of his consciousness. Qin Ruing was very important to him. After this thought was projected into his consciousness, it naturally made sense that Qin Ruing's soul was at the end of the Nether River. But the problem was, the soul mirror wasn't his magic treasure. How could it be affected by his consciousness and place Ying's soul at the end of the Nether River? Moreover, when he brought out Qin Ruing's soul, the resistance was so great that Ying lost a part of her soul. So why was it so easy and smooth when he brought out his sister-in-law's soul? The more Chun-Shi thought about it, the more he felt that something was wrong. Abnormal things in the world were strange. This was just too strange. How many more secrets was this broken mirror hiding? At this thought, Chun-Shi prepared to let his soul out of his body again and explore the soul mirror. However, right at this moment, Qin Xueqing suddenly opened her eyes. The soul state was unconscious, so Qin Xueqing's memory was still stuck at the time before she fell into a coma. Therefore, when she opened her eyes and saw Chun-Shi sitting by her bed, Qin Xueqing was stunned. Chun-Shi was so focused on the soul mirror that he did not notice that Qin Xueqing had woken up. Although Qin Xueqing was almost 30 years old, she was still an unmarried virgin. She had never even held hands with anyone. It was already the middle of the night. How could Qin Xueqing not be shocked when a man like Chun-Shi suddenly appeared by her bed? Brother-in-law sneaked into her room? How was she going to face people in the future? Her sister-in-law had a bad temper. After being provoked, he went berserk on the spot and directly kicked at Chun-Shi's waist. This kick, she had used 120% of her strength. After all, Qin Xueqing had already stepped into the Heavenly Man stage and was a genuine Golden Core stage cultivator. At such a close distance, plus the fact that Chun-Shi was completely unguarded. Therefore, by the time Chun-Shi reacted, her leg had already kicked Chun-Shi's waist. Crack. With a muffled sound, her sister-in-law's right leg was immediately fractured. Then, Her entire body was thrown away by Chun-Chi's protective chi like a rag doll that had been casually thrown away. If Chun-Chi had not used his true essence to catch her in time, Qin Shueqing would have crashed through several walls before falling to the ground. Hey, that, Chun-Chi tried to explain, but Qin Shueqing did not give him a chance to explain. Instead, she pointed at the door and shouted, "Get out! Get out of here!" "Okay, don't be agitated, I'll go out now." He had clearly come to do a good deed, but in the end, he was like a thief who had been caught red-handed. In this regard, Chun-Chi could only helplessly shake his head and then run out of the East Wing like he was escaping. It was bad enough to be misunderstood by his sister-in-law. Who would have thought? As soon as Chun-Chi walked out of the East Wing, he met Qin Ruoying's cold gaze head-on. How sharp were the eyes and ears of a heavenly man. As soon as Qin Shueqing made a sound, she had already gotten up to check on the situation. After seeing Chun-Chi come out, Qin Ruoying did not say a word. After a bang sound, she closed the door and went back to the room to comfort the little fellow who had just woken up. Chun-Chi stood in the courtyard with a helpless expression. He looked left and right at the East Wing, then at the West Wing, only to feel a chill in his heart. This was great. The yellow mud had really fallen into his crotch. Even if it was not SH*T, it was SH*T. Then, Chun-Chi gloomily set up a soundproof restriction in the courtyard. Please remember the domain name of this book.com. Wonderful book mobile version website.com. Chapter 453. There were 8 immortal arts: pills, talismans, weapon formations, and witchcraft. They were pills, talismans, weapon refinement, formations, casting witchcraft, and puppetry. The first 4 were more commonly used. Basically, every orthodox cultivator would gradually learn and master them as they cultivated. The last 4, on the other hand, weren't all that impressive, so only those with crooked paths would focus on them. No one was perfect, including Chun-Chi. In online gaming terms, Chun-Chi was a top laner who focused on head-on combat. Although he knew a little bit of miscellaneous skills, they were merely summoner skills. When it came to weapon refinement, alchemy, formations, and so on, the support healer was clearly the true professional. Hence, Chun-Chi's head hurt. The heaven-bearing, efficacious floating mirror was a connate peerless treasure. Chun-Chi didn't know much about connate peerless treasures. It was said that only Tribulation Ascension cultivators who'd undergone the baptism of heavenly tribulations could refine their own personal treasures with the connate true essence in their bodies. Only then could they truly refine a connate peerless treasure. From this, one could see just how rare connate peerless treasures were. It was for this reason that Chun-Chi, who'd only been in the soul formation stage, didn't have the right to come into contact with a connate peerless treasure. Of course, even if Chun-Chi had obtained a connate peerless treasure by chance, that didn't mean he could use it for himself. The logic was actually quite simple. It was like a poor bastard suddenly obtaining the keys to a Ferrari. He probably wouldn't even know how to start the engine after getting in. There were many types of treasures. Judging from how the soul mirror had been activated a few times, it was most likely a support-type treasure. Support-type treasures were usually refined for specific situations and weren't very practical. Hence, after the grand, pure divine ancestor passed away, the soul mirror had been placed in the Imperial Hall to collect dust. The soul mirror was far beyond what Chun-Chi could grasp. Hence, he couldn't find the correct way to activate it after flipping the mirror over and over again for an entire night. Speaking of which, it was strange. After Chun-Chi brought out his sister-in-law's soul, the soul mirror suddenly shut down like a phone with no battery. After that, no matter how hard he tried, he was unable to let his spirit enter it again. It was as if the soul mirror had been reduced to an ordinary item, and the space of his consciousness had been completely shut off. He couldn't very well try to break open the soul mirror, could he? Magic treasures needed to be recharged. Soul mirror had created a white hole to engulf a large world, then forcibly reverse the orbits of the 9 planets, thereby expending a lot of energy. Was that why it needed some time to recover? Chun-Chi pondered for a long time before coming to such a conclusion. Only then did he feel slightly relieved. Heaven and earth can bear witness. He really didn't want to use this opportunity to spend a few more days with the amnesiac Ying so that he could have a change of taste. The next morning, following the loud and clear cry of the rooster next door, the little fellow slowly woke up from her sleep. She didn't know what happened last night, but she was keenly aware that her mother didn't give her father a good look during the meal. As such, the smart little fellow wisely kept her mouth shut and put on her little backpack after breakfast. Perhaps it was because his sister-in-law was too embarrassed to see anyone after the farce last night, so she left the courtyard in the middle of the night, and no one knew where she was now. She wanted to explain the situation to her, but he saw that she was being very unapproachable, so he wisely disappeared from her sight. His sister-in-law had left, but Roying was still there. Thus, Shi made his way to the west wing and politely knocked on the door before yelling into the room. Yin, let's go. Daddy will take you to school today. Okay. The little fellow immediately ran out of the room after hearing Shi's call. As soon as she stepped out of the door, she spread open her arms as if asking Shi to carry her. After Shi picked her up from the ground, the little fellow turned her head and coyly asked into the room, Mommy, aren't you taking me to school? The room was quiet, and Roying didn't seem to have any intention of replying. The father and daughter waited for a while and couldn't help but look at each other. Thus, the little fellow whispered into Shi's ear, Daddy, did you make Mommy angry? How would I dare? Shi smiled bitterly and shook his head. Hearing this, the little fellow's big eyes immediately started to spin. Daddy, do you want me to help you coax Mommy out? This little fellow was so mischievous, she actually used the word coax. After Shi heard this, he immediately put her back on the ground. The father and daughter looked at each other tacitly. After that, the little fellow seemed to have received some kind of order and quickly ran back into the room. Mommy, take me to school. Let's take the bus, it's fun. You haven't been to my school yet. The teacher said she wants to see you. Come on, come on. No matter how the little fellow acted coquettishly, Ring didn't reply. In fact, since she woke up, she hadn't said more than 10 words. She was like an observer from outer space, coldly watching everything that happened around her. She only listened but didn't speak. She didn't speak, nor did she chase the little fellow away. The little fellow grabbed her hand tightly, shaking her head and wagging her tail, constantly acting coquettishly. Finally, Ruoying seemed to be convinced. As soon as she stood up, the little fellow began to drag her out with all her might. Of course, if she didn't want to go out, how could the little fellow pull her? Ruoying did go out, but she still didn't give Shi a good look. She didn't even look at Shi, as if such a big person didn't exist. Therefore, the little fellow held her father's left hand and her mother's right hand, like a bridge between the two. Time to go to school. The sun shines in the sky. The flowers smile at me. The little bird says, Good morning. Why do you carry explosives on your back? Like the most ordinary family of 3, the little fellow pulled the couple onto the bus to school. Shi and Ring didn't speak on the way, but the little fellow seemed to have been injected with stimulants, chattering nonstop along the way, even disturbing the passengers on the side. After Shi apologized to the nearby passengers in a low voice, he didn't stop the little fellow from continuing, but motioned for her to speak softly and slowly. Dad was listening carefully. Big things like arguing with others, small things like who borrowed her eraser. The little fellow chattered nonstop, and Shi listened with interest. And at this time, after getting on the bus, Roying, who had been looking out of the window, finally looked like a sculpture that came to life. She turned her head. Her eyes paused on Shi's face for a second, and then completely focused on the little fellow, looking at Yin's little face that had turned red with excitement. At that moment, Ruoying couldn't help but reach out and pinch her little face. Chapter 454. Ruoying's subconscious affectionate actions were naturally seen by Shi. Therefore, Shi immediately put on a calm and collected expression, as if to imply that he did not see anything. There are many types of amnesia. The most common situation was not being able to recognize one's loved ones. However, they could still speak, write, draw, and have the ability to take care of themselves in daily life. Therefore, amnesia did not mean that one had lost their intelligence. And it was precisely because Qin Ruoying had lost her memory that everything was so new and strange to her. She was very clear about the meaning of the word mother, but she did not dislike the little fellow calling her mother left and right. Every time she heard the little fellow call her mother, she instinctively wanted to respond. If it was not for the special, reserved nature of women stopping her, Qin Ring would have already held the little fellow in her arms and caressed him. Of course, Qin Ruoying could accept the little fellow, but it did not mean that she could accept Qin Shi. Women always had to be a little guarded against men. The kind of woman who would completely fall into a man's good intentions could only play the role of a victim in a relationship. The one who cannot get is in an uproar. The one who is favored is fearless. No matter where it was, this sentence was absolutely regarded as the supreme truth. Therefore, even though Qianxi had already stepped into the insightful emptiness realm, he was still deeply immersed in it, and even somewhat enjoyed it. The capital-affiliated primary school was not far from Hohai, about 7 or 8 stops away. After the family of 3 got off the car, the little fellow, like other children, held his father in one hand and his mother in the other, and skipped towards the school gate. Although the school was chosen by Qin Shi, this was the first time he came, so he could not help but use his divine sense to carefully scan the school. And overall, it was not bad. At least he did not find any filth hidden under the sanctimonious surface. The management of a primary school was not as loose as a kindergarten, so Qin Shi and Qin Ring could not even enter the school gate, and could only stand at the school gate and say goodbye to the little fellow. Dad, goodbye. Mom, goodbye. I will listen to teacher obediently. Remember to pick me up after school. Perhaps it was because Qin Shi and Qin Ruoying were sending Nian to school for the first time, and because the couple was too good-looking, even the guards at the entrance couldn't help but take a few more glances at them. Nian was the most popular person in the class. Therefore, after many parents sent their children to school, they could not help but stand at the side and whisper to each other. Is that child the one who dared to hit someone on the first day of reporting? Yes, he's in the same class as our Yang Yang. He's very handsome, but his temper is too bad. He doesn't look like a girl at all. I don't know how his family educated him. Didn't you say you were going to fire her last time? Why are you still here? Expelled? Don't joke around. She's the class monitor now. She got full marks in the first half of the exam. Every parent-teacher meeting, she'll be singled out for praise. Oh, this little girl is so powerful. How is she powerful? Isn't it because her family is powerful? At this point, a trace of displeasure flashed across the parent's face. Then, with a look of disdain, she said, I heard that her family has an education system. They're different from us commoners. Her performance in school directly affects the evaluation of the school. How can a child like this not be powerful? I see. Qin Shi quietly listened to the conversation from the side. It was because Nian's performance in school was too outstanding that these parents began to suspect that the school had given Nian special treatment. If one thought about it carefully, this kind of narrow-minded thinking could be understood. Every parent wanted their child to be outstanding and stand out from the crowd. Any child who was able to enter the capital-affiliated primary school had at least gone through several rounds of screening. Basically, it could be concluded that they were good seedlings that far surpassed their peers. But it was a pity that excellence was always measured by comparison. Compared to Nian, even the smartest and most outstanding child could only be reduced to ordinary in the end. After all, when it came to comparing fathers, no one could compare to her. When he left the last time, Qin Shi was worried that he would take a long time to come back, so he took the initiative to remove the first layer of seal on Nian's body. It was also from then on that Nian gradually became different from other children. Although Nian didn't know how to cultivate, she had already found a sense of qi when she was 5 years old. This innate affinity for spirit energy was something that many people didn't have. This was the so-called talent that was bestowed to her by God. Others couldn't be envious of it. Qin Shi had been gone for more than a year, and Nian had also been washed by the tide of spirit energy in the courtyard for more than a year. She was still young, so she couldn't see anything for the time being. But if she continued to develop at this speed, it was estimated that it wouldn't be long before Nian would be able to skip a grade. Skip from first grade to third grade to sixth grade. Skip from first grade to third grade, and directly enter university in first grade. At that time, she probably wouldn't be an adult and would have graduated from university. Could it be in the future would he have to send Nian to the junior class of the Chinese Academy of Science? Chun-Shi was still seriously thinking about whether to put the seal back. After Qin Ruoying saw Nian's figure disappear, she turned around and walked out along the street. Seeing this, Chun-Shi had to temporarily put this problem to the back of his mind, and then quickly followed. "Hey, Ying, where are you going?" This time, there was no little guy in the middle to act as a bridge, so Chun-Shi didn't dare to follow too closely. Seeing that he was so self-conscious, Qin Ruoying let him be. As a result, the couple who were incomparably loving in the past were now like a couple who quarreled and broke up. One in front and one behind, they were silent and walked aimlessly on the street. Well, in addition to taking care of Nian's daily life, Chun-Shi also had to pay attention to not let his wife get lost at all times. Back to the cloud-piercing shuttle that accidentally broke into the Tianshu ruins. This cloud-piercing shuttle was not simple. Its source of power was completely dependent on spirit stones. As long as there were enough spirit stones, it could even cross the entire Milky Way. Earth was about 6 billion kilometers away from the Oort Nebula. Even if it flew at the speed of light, it would take nearly 6 hours to reach it. Although the cloud-piercing shuttle's flying speed did not exceed the speed of light, it could perform short-distance space jumps. And this was the embodiment of the true meaning of the word void that Dongshu stage cultivators used. Chenghua and Yizhi. Just like that, the two daring youths piloted the cloud-piercing shuttle towards the direction of the sun. Along the way, they discovered many planets from Pluto to Neptune, then to Saturn and Jupiter. Although these planets were large in size, they were all dead planets. So even though the two of them kept stopping along the way, they quickly arrived at Mars. After Chenghua drove the cloud-piercing shuttle around Mars, an aqua-blue planet came into view. Yizhi was the first to discover that this planet was different from the rest. The planet's environment directly affected its color. So under normal circumstances, one only needed to look at the color of the planet to determine if it was suitable for habitation. Earth was aqua-blue, like a sparkling and translucent sapphire. It was very beautiful. But the most eye-catching thing about it was the spirit chi of heaven and earth that kept flowing out. This was a sacred cultivation ground. Yizhi was stunned. After being stunned for a long while, he excitedly pulled on Chenghua's sleeve and shouted, "Chenghua, look, there's spirit chi on that planet." Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heaven's Divine Emperor mobile version website. Chapter 455. Not every planet could nurture life, and not every planet could produce heaven and earth spirit chi. Therefore, planets like Earth that could nurture life and produce heaven and earth spirit chi at the same time were usually extremely rare. Cultivators would call such an existence a holy land for cultivation. The important thing to mention here was, although it could be called a holy land for cultivation as long as it met the above two conditions, the holy land for cultivation did not necessarily refer to a single planet. Even if it was just a void crack in the universe or a continent formed after a planet shattered, as long as it could nurture life and produce heaven and earth spirit chi at the same time, it could be called a holy land for cultivation. Because of the effect of gravity, all the planets in the universe were spherical. It was impossible for there to be a situation where the sky was round and the earth was round like in ancient myths. If there was, then this holy land for cultivation would definitely not be a celestial body that existed naturally, but something forcefully created by a high-level cultivator with supreme magic power. For example, a strange existence like a great world. Earth was really too beautiful. It was a natural product from the chaotic universe. How could man-made things compare to it? The Supreme Palace enclosure sounded very powerful, right? It was actually just a continental plate floating in the universe. Enclosure read, Yuan, as in broken walls and ruins. Changhua and Yiji had grown up in the Supreme Palace enclosure. Even though they would explore other planets when they had nothing to do, looking for life planets for fun, they had never found a true planet-level holy land for cultivation. The universe was really too big. If the Supreme Palace enclosure was a grape, then Earth, which was much bigger than it, was an apple. A bright red apple. Therefore, the two youths were like Columbus who had discovered a new continent. They were so excited that they could not control themselves. The Dubhe Ruins. It really was the Dubhe Ruins. Since it could be called a ruin, then the cultivation heritage on this planet had probably been cut off a long time ago. And didn't this mean that they could create their own heritage here and take the Dubhe Ruins for themselves? Let's go and take a look. After hearing Yiji's words, Changhua carefully sized up the planet. After he confirmed that there were no defensive formations on it, Changhua could no longer contain his excitement. He drove the cloud-piercing shuttle and rushed over. Wait, we haven't confirmed if there's any danger up there. If we barge in rashly like this, we won't be able to deal with any danger with our current cultivation. So I think we should inform our family first and wait for them to send reinforcements. As he spoke, Yiji took out a voice transmission spirit talisman. Seeing this, Changhua couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. Then, he pretended to be indifferent and replied, Well, okay. Wait a moment. I'll activate the talisman now. Chung, 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 Chan Chung. Say Chung. Hua actually took advantage of the time when he was distracted and snatched the talisman from his hand and fiercely tore it into pieces. Chung Chs, Chung Ch. Chenghua's actions angered Yiji. Just as he was about to teach Changhua a lesson, Changhua completely ignored him. Instead, he directly made the cloud-piercing shuttle perform a space leap. Whoosh! Yiji felt his vision blur. When he could see his surroundings clearly again, he realized that he was already in the orbit of the moon. The blue planet was not far in front of him. Because they were so close, Yiji could even see the mountains and rivers on the ground with his naked eyes. Seeing this, Yiji was not happy. Instead, he was angry. He hurriedly turned his head and realized that the high-grade spirit stone at the front of the ship had lost its luster. This was a sign that the spirit stone had been used up. Their cultivation levels were too low, so they could only rely on the spirit stone to drive the cloud-piercing shuttle. If they were flying normally, it would be fine. There was no resistance in the universe, so the consumption would be very low. But if they performed a space leap, every space leap was equivalent to the full strength attack of a Dongshu stage cultivator. Thus, even a high-grade spirit stone of exceptional quality could not support the cloud-piercing shuttle to perform space leaps frequently. The two of them had only brought a total of 2 upper-grade spirit stones with them this time. Now that they had wasted one, how could Yiji not feel distressed? Are you crazy? You want to jump such a short distance? Once the spirit stone is used up, what are we going to do? Don't tell me you really want to fly back slowly. Yiji looked as if he expected better from him. Changhua, on the other hand, smiled cheekily and did not seem to mind. Their cultivations were on par with each other, so it was impossible for Yiji to take him down easily. Tell me, what exactly do you want? Seeing Yiji's impatient expression, Changhua knew that he was really angry this time. Thus, Changhua immediately put away his cheeky smile and said to Yiji in an extremely serious tone, Yiji, have you heard of an old saying? Life and death are up to fate. Riches and honor are found in danger. Since the two of us can obtain this opportunity, why should we be so cautious and overcautious? You and I are both bastards in our families. We are not well liked. Once the news gets out, we will not be able to eat meat and soup. Hearing this, Yiji could not help but interrupt him. He said anxiously, Do you really think this heavenly pivot ruins is a good place? There might be some great danger lurking within, with the cultivation of the two of us. Whether it is dangerous or not, we will know once we explore. Hua did not wait for Yi to finish and interrupted him decisively. He had already made his decision. So no matter how much Yi objected, Hua had to go and explore today. Yi wanted stability. Hua wanted danger. This was the first time the two of them had such a huge difference in opinion. Hua stiffened his neck and refused to budge. Seeing this, Yi could only sigh and compromise. Fine, I am afraid of you. I will listen to you. But you must remember, the moment we discover anything wrong, we must leave this place immediately. I do not want to be buried with you. His anger was real, and so was his friendship. Seeing Hua so determined, Yi could only let him be. All right, don't worry. I may be brave, but I am not stupid. Moreover, we still have the cloud-piercing shuttle. Even if we encounter danger, we can easily retreat. Hua blinked and began to pilot the cloud-piercing shuttle towards Earth. Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heavens Divine Emperor Mobile Version website. Chapter 456. Which places on Earth had the densest spiritual energy? If one were to look abroad, then Europe's Vatican, the Middle East Jerusalem, Spain's Santiago, India's Louis Garden, and Nepal's Kathmandu were all places with extremely abundant spiritual energy. As the saying goes, rain and dew are all touched. Earth was so big, so naturally, it was impossible for all the spiritual energy to be concentrated in Huaxia. Therefore, under the constant baptism of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, many legacies similar to cultivators appeared abroad, such as the onmyojis and ninjas of Japan, the knights, sorcerers, and vampires of Europe, the pharaohs and mummies of Egypt, as well as the black magic and voodoo of South Asia. These legacies seemed to be varied, but in essence, they were not much different from the legacies of the orthodox cultivators. And this seemed to coincide with the old saying, "The great Tao flowed like mercury, and every grain was round." However, perhaps it was because they had only appeared for a short time, so most of the cultivation legacies abroad had not formed a complete system. If they were compared to primitive people who had just entered the Stone Age, then the cultivation legacy represented by Chun, she was obviously a high-level cosmic civilization that could freely travel the stars. The difference between the two was no less than the difference between heaven and earth. It was precisely because of this that Chun Shi guessed that the ancient cultivators represented by the Tai Ching divine ancestor might have come to earth from a cultivation holy land. Otherwise, how could one explain the existence of Tiandu? The recovery of spiritual energy was a very long process. Just like when it was exhausted, the whole process might last 10 years, 100 years, or even 1,000 years. However, even if the spiritual energy of heaven and earth on earth had not reached its peak, just based on the current situation, earth was already very suitable for cultivators to live and reproduce here. In the eyes of Hua and Yi, earth was like a new continent that had not been discovered by Columbus. The environment here was good and resources were abundant. The only bad thing was it was probably the indigenous people who had a population of 7 billion. There were indeed too many people. Moreover, most of them had poor aptitudes and were not worth absorbing. Even if they captured these people and brought them back to do hard labor, Hua would feel that it was a waste of food. The two of them quietly landed on Earth on the cloud-piercing shuttle. The place where they landed, it was none other than Yellowstone Park, where Shi had refined the Adumbra flower. The spirit Shi in this place was surging, and some of the medicinal power left behind by Shi when he was refining pills could be faintly felt. Therefore, Yellowstone Park naturally became the first stop of their trip. If I remember the name correctly, this should be a low-level technological civilization. Hua steered the cloud-piercing shuttle through the skies of the United States. Occasionally, he would lower his head to look at the buildings below. Naturally, the buildings on Earth were extremely strange to the two of them. Although Hua was young, he could be considered to be experienced and knowledgeable. Therefore, he recognized at a glance that Earth's development was a little off track. The once glorious Tian Shu ruins, How could they have been reduced to a mediocre technological civilization? One had to know that technological civilizations were usually born on planets without spiritual energy. The Tianshu ruins clearly had the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. So why did the development of Earth's civilization deviate? In this regard, although Cheng Hua was somewhat puzzled, he was more pleasantly surprised in his heart. Along the way, he did not detect any signs of true origin fluctuations on anyone, so he could basically be sure that this was a cultivation holy land without any immortal cultivator's inheritance. And what did this mean? It meant that even if he was only at the golden core stage, he could do whatever he wanted here without any fear. When he thought of this, Cheng Hua was suddenly very excited. He could not help but want to remove his aura concealment technique and directly descend on Earth, as if he was the king of the world. Seeing this, Iji was still able to remain sober for the time being. Don't get excited. Let's find out the truth first. Even if it's a low-level technological civilization, there should be some kind of weapon that can threaten us. The two of us are new here, so it's better not to be too ostentatious. After all, to these natives, we're guests from the boundless starry sky. Iji seemed to be advising Cheng Hua to be careful. In reality, even he could not help but feel a little arrogant at this moment. After all, the two of them were only teenagers. If they were not arrogant when they were young, why would they enter the world? Of course, being arrogant was one thing, but for the sake of caution, Iji still suggested that they capture one of the natives to understand the situation. Okay, we'll do as you say. I'll go capture one of them and ask about the situation. After saying that, without waiting for Iji to reply, Cheng Hua could no longer suppress the excitement in his heart. He actually jumped out of the cloud-piercing shuttle, just like that. One had to know that the two of them were now in a small town not far from Yellowstone Park. This was a tourist town. There were not many residents, only about 1,000 or so. After Cheng Hua jumped out of the cloud-piercing shuttle, he flew straight to the market in the center of the town like Superman. He did not hide his figure anymore. Instead, he deliberately grabbed an unlucky young man in front of everyone in the market. This young man was bound by his true origin. Instantly, he was like a doll in a claw machine, lifted into the air by an invisible hand. Who is the person in charge here? Tell him to come out and see me. At this moment, the two of them were very much like bandits going down the mountain to rob someone. The target of the robbery was naturally the mansion of a big family on Earth. Iji's idea was to first disguise as a servant and infiltrate the mansion. After finding out the situation, he would then take over the mansion in one fell swoop. However, Cheng Hua could not be bothered to do such a thing. When the bandits came to rob, the owner was not at home. Could it be that the bandits would obediently wait for the owner to come back? The most straightforward method was to openly go to the door like Cheng Hua did. Not only could he immediately find out the strength of the mansion's defenses, but he could also force the owner of the mansion to appear immediately. Wouldn't that be the fastest way to go? Cheng Hua's attitude was not very friendly. Coupled with his shocking appearance, it instantly scared the people in the market. The people of the United States had always been obsessed with filming superhero blockbusters. But Cheng Hua right now, wasn't he very much like the villains that often appeared in movies? The unlucky young man was scared witless by Cheng Hua on the spot. He talked a lot, but Cheng Hua didn't understand what he was talking about. In this regard, Cheng Hua was not in a hurry. He directly took out a spiritual talisman from his pocket and slapped it between the young man's eyebrows. The function of this spiritual talisman was very simple, and that was to translate. It did not translate the young man's words word by word. Instead, it copied the young man's words with one spirit. Almost instantly, Cheng Hua could learn the language used by the young man. However, just as Cheng Hua was busy learning English, a very discordant sound suddenly rang out in the market. Bang! 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 It was the sound of a gunshot. Seeing that Cheng Hua could freely float in the air like Superman and make threatening moves to the town's residents, the town's police patrolling the market directly took out their guns and decisively fired. Chapter 457. This scene was really similar to the movie Superman, Man of Steel. But whether it was in the movie or in reality, when the United States police encountered a similar incident, they would definitely do the same decisively. Take out a gun and shoot. It couldn't be helped. Who asked the people abroad to live in the abyss of suffering all year round? The police's actions were understandable, but when all this fell into Chung Hua's eyes, his reaction was much more intense than the villain in the movie. You want to die? A mere 5.56mm bullet naturally could not penetrate Chung Hua's protective aura. But this provocative action also successfully provoked Chung Hua's anger. He was the pride of the supreme palace enclosure. How could he tolerate this group of lowly ants wantonly provoking him? So, without any hesitation, Chung Hua directly formed a sword with the fingers of his left hand and pointed at the unlucky United States police below. Then a small metal sword about 3 inches long suddenly shot out from Chung Hua's sleeve. The small metal sword was extremely fast. The townsfolk next to them only saw a flash of white light in the air. When they turned their heads to look at the police, they saw that there was a 2-finger-wide wound between his eyebrows, and blood kept gushing out from it. The police fell to the ground. The townsfolk were suddenly in a mess. And just as everyone screamed and fled back to their houses, a burst of urgent sirens suddenly sounded on the street not far away. It must be mentioned here that the United States was not only the country with the highest crime rate in the world, but also the country with the fastest police speed in the world. Therefore, just as Chung Hua killed a police officer, the town police station had already received the news and organized a large group of people to rush here. Chung Hua naturally heard the movement in the distance, but he had no intention of hiding. Instead, he just floated over the market and threw the young man he caught before to the ground. One had to know that Chung Hua was now flying in the sky, about 4 or 5 stories above the ground. Therefore, when a young man fell to the ground, he immediately let out a heart-wrenching scream. However, Chung Hua didn't seem to hear it. Instead, he was still looking at the various objects and decorations in the market with interest. Such an act of disregard for life was indeed in line with the old saying, "Those who are not of my race are bound to have a different heart." Just a low-level technological civilization. In Chung Hua's opinion, these people were actually more like ants walking upright. So how could he possibly feel guilty for trampling a few ants to death? Chung Hua was deliberately looking for trouble today. The bigger the commotion, the more they could use it to find out the details of the Tianshu ruins. This action seemed a little reckless, but in fact, it was the most direct and effective method. After all, Chung Hua had the cloud-piercing shuttle with him. Even if he really encountered any danger, he could use the cloud-piercing shuttle to escape. It was truly a situation where one could advance to attack or retreat to defend. Before the battle had even begun, one had already obtained the initiative. Chung Hua's provocation with great fanfare quickly attracted the town's police department's encirclement and suppression. Towards this non-human existence, the police chief was very wise not to shout and persuade him to surrender. Instead, he directly ordered Chung Hua to be killed on the spot. The equipment of the United States Police was much better than the equipment of the Huaxia Police. Following the police chief's shout of fire, the town that hadn't been so lively in a long time suddenly became as lively as the new year. A series of crackling gunshots rang out, more lively than the fireworks of the new year. In an instant, countless bullets shot out from the barrel of the gun and rained down on Chung Hua. The United States Police never gave criminals any chance to speak, but unfortunately, Chung Hua wasn't an ordinary criminal. He was a golden core cultivator who could fly in the sky and burrow into the ground. How could he be injured by mere bullets? Therefore, Chung Hua was like watching a tiger's performance through glass in a zoo. No matter how the other party bared their fangs and brandished their claws at him, he just quietly flew in the air without moving. The bullets were all blocked by the protective chi around his body. After the first round of attacks, when everyone was busy reloading, Chung Hua's voice slowly rang out above the market. "Are you done? Then it's my turn." The United States people couldn't understand his alien language, but that didn't matter, because they would soon fall asleep forever. Chung Hua waved his hand, and dozens of small metal swords flew out of his sleeves. Wherever the small swords passed, blood sprayed out. In just a breath's time, The town regained its tranquility. Changhua looked at the pile of corpses below in boredom, but then he lost interest and muttered, "Too weak." He was still floating in the air above the market, as if he was demonstrating his power. Not long after the town's police station was wiped out, the news spread quickly, layer by layer. In the end, it directly alarmed the higher-ups of the United States military. After hearing that the other party might be in existence comparable to a superhero, the army station near Yellowstone Park immediately took action. The United States people's exoskeleton technology was becoming more and more mature. In terms of individual strength, soldiers wearing exoskeleton armor were not weaker than peak-strength martial artists. However, it was this special operations team that had the best individual ability in the U.S. Army that was monitoring their bodily functions was completely disabled the moment they got close to Changhua. Warning. Warning. This is a cultivator from Huaxia. His strength is far beyond X level. It was strange. Although Changhua came from outside the solar system, he still had a standard Asian appearance. Moreover, he was different from the emaciated and sallow Asians in Southeast Asia. Therefore, the United States military recognized him as a Huaxia person almost immediately. A celestial from Huaxia. Why did he suddenly come to the United States to cause trouble? One should know that there were many unwritten rules in this world. One of them was existences above peak strength usually did not step out of the country. The reason was very simple. Once a peak strength grandmaster left the country, the United States people would use all kinds of methods to capture these grandmasters who were close to superpowers for experiments. They wanted to perfect their exoskeleton armor through science and achieve the goal of mass-producing peak-strength grandmasters. Japan was the little brother of the United States people. Moreover, the Inyang Liao controlled almost all the practitioners in Japan. Therefore, the United States people rarely captured Inyang masters for experiments. Huaxia and Japan were different. There were too many rogue practitioners in Huaxia. There were simply too many existences like Sunwen. Therefore, they became the main source of experimental materials. Although martial artists and necromancers had combat strength far beyond ordinary people, they were still too weak to fight against the state machine. You know martial arts, I know science. Even peak-strength martial artists knew how to cherish their lives. How could a celestial easily provoke the United States? Other than Qin Shi, no one would want to test the power of a nuclear bomb. X-level was very powerful and rare. The United States, people had been coveting this level for a long time. They just could not find suitable experimental materials. Therefore, when the Pentagon confirmed that Changhua was at least X-level, the senior military officials present were collectively excited. As long as they captured this X-level, the bottleneck of exoskeleton armor technology would be able to achieve a breakthrough. God bless the United States. Chapter 458. Ever since the end of the Second War of Independence, the United States had never been baptized by the flames of war. It cannot be helped. After all, the United States was the only superpower in the world today. Their tyrannical military strength gave the United States great confidence. Therefore, they had always been the ones to behave atrociously in other people's territory. Now, how could they tolerate others to behave atrociously in their territory? Therefore, the moment the Special Operations Team was destroyed, the Department of Homeland Security and the National Guard had already organized and sent a large group of people to the front line. The American Army needed to gather, but Changhua did not need to. While he was waiting for the other party's reinforcements to arrive, Changhua was so bored that he started to wander around the town's market. About 20 minutes later, the first batch of National Guard arrived at the scene. The American Army first alienated the local townspeople through the broadcast. Then, they started to persuade Changhua to surrender. At this time, Changhua could already understand English. However, he ignored all these words and did not take them to heart at all. It was just a low-level technological civilization. Could they really hurt him? Changhua had already seen the power of the 5.56 millimeters bullet. This kind of attack, that was like scratching an itch, also caused Cheng Hua's judgment of the threat of the Tianshu ruins to drop by several levels. Therefore, Cheng Hua could not help but feel a little arrogant. He even hoped that the other party could give him a little surprise. However, he did not expect that this surprise would come so quickly. Cheng Hua had greatly underestimated the lethality of a technological civilization. Therefore, he did not prepare any defense at all. After waiting for the townspeople to evacuate and there was no response after 3 rounds of shouting, the American army officially launched an attack on Cheng Hua. Swoosh! Following a loud and ear-piercing sonic boom, an anti-tank missile hit the shop Cheng Hua was in. The surrounding shops also instantly turned into a sea of fire in this explosion. The bullet could not penetrate Cheng Hua's protective chi, but the anti-tank missile was different. In his carelessness, Cheng Hua was sent flying by the anti-tank missile. If it weren't for the fact that he still had a defensive magic treasure on him, he was afraid that he would have suffered heavy injuries on the spot because of this. The dust raised by the collapse of the house made Cheng Hua look a little dusty. After a brief moment of shock, Cheng Hua was completely enraged. How infuriating! This was the first time Cheng Hua had been so angry. On one hand, it was because he had almost been injured by the missile. On the other hand, it was because Ziji was lying on the cloud-piercing shuttle and laughing at him. Cheng Hua could not tolerate losing face in front of Ziji, so he immediately flew out from the ruins of the shop. Then he suddenly pulled out a 3-foot-long sword box from his sleeve and threw it into the air. Speaking of which, it was strange. After this sword box was thrown into the air by Cheng Hua, it actually floated quietly in the air. When the battle command saw that Cheng Hua flew into the air again as if nothing had happened, they decisively ordered the soldiers to launch another attack. This time, the American army was not trying to test the waters, so they launched a round of artillery fire. In an instant, countless poisonous stingers, battle axes, bumblebees, and other sophisticated missiles that were made with a lot of money were crazily thrown at the town where Cheng Hua was. Seeing this, Cheng Hua had a murderous look in his eyes. He could not help but grit his teeth and shouted coldly, "You're asking for death." Before he finished speaking, the sword box that Cheng Hua had thrown into the air before seemed to have received some instructions. A secret door suddenly opened on the top of the box, and then countless small metal swords suddenly shot out from it. These small metal swords are like a school of fish at the bottom of the sea. After they came out of the sword box, the small metal swords started to swim flexibly in the air. Although the missile's flying speed was fast, the small metal swords were obviously faster. Bang! 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 It was accompanied by a series of explosions. The American Army's round of artillery fire was actually blocked by the small metal swords just like that. At that moment, almost everyone in the battle command at the back was shocked by this strange scene. Is this the strength of a Super X level? Is this still a human? After the small metal swords intercepted the missiles in the sky, they did not stop because of this. Instead, they continued to fly toward the location where the American army was. These small metal swords were only about 10 centimeters long. Logically speaking, the sword box should not be able to hold many of them. However, what was strange was, from the moment Cheng Hua activated the sword box, there was an endless stream of small metal swords flying out of it, and they did not stop for even a moment. Therefore, in just a short while, the sky of the town was even covered by the small metal swords released from the sword box. The densely packed, small metal swords rushed toward the location where the American army was like a swarm of locusts passing through. When had the ordinary soldiers ever seen such a strange scene? Therefore, they were frightened by the overwhelming number of small metal swords on the spot, and they fired their guns randomly. The muzzles of the guns spat out tongues of fire crazily. The bullets hit the small metal swords, and instantly there was a series of ding, ding, dang, dang sounds of metal colliding. However, it was a pity. In the end, these actions were futile. The small metal swords quickly rushed into the American Army's armored battle group. It did not matter whether it was the drivers hiding in the armored vehicles or the fully armed soldiers. In front of the small metal swords, human lives were as cheap as grass. A light cut would instantly cause a large number of them to fall. In less than 5 minutes, this rapid reaction force of 3,000 people had been completely wiped off the face of the earth by Cheng Hua. Fresh blood stained the ground red. The vast grassland that was bustling with noise and excitement earlier seemed to have turned into a mass grave 10 miles away at that moment. Even from afar, one could smell the thick stench of blood in the air. Such indiscriminate killing. Cheng Hua, I'm afraid you're going to suffer retribution in the future. Iji looked at the battlefield below and could not help but frown deeply. He really did not expect that Cheng Hua was actually so vicious and merciless. Looking at the situation, Cheng Hua did not seem to treat these golden-haired natives as humans at all. The scene had already been broadcasted through the satellite and was clearly presented on the big screen of the battle command at the rear. At this moment, the entire battle command was silent. Almost everyone was stunned by the tragic and bloody scene in front of them. Nuclear bomb. Request to use nuclear bomb. After coming back to his senses, the supreme commander of this battle seemed to have gone mad as he frantically requested the military headquarters to use nuclear bomb. However, what no one expected was the military headquarters actually rejected his request very decisively. The Yellowstone Park supervolcano is in an active period. Once the nuclear bomb is used, it is very likely to cause the supervolcano to erupt accidentally. The moment he heard this reason, the colonel despaired. However, what he did not know was, when a military headquarters rejected his use of nuclear bomb, they also submitted another request to the White House. The use of nuclear bomb is restricted. The military situation is urgent. Please inform Huaxia and ask Wu Yin to urgently dispatch X-level military support to us. Chapter 459. From the day the Declaration of Independence was issued, the United States had only been established for 200 years. Therefore, even if the United States was very powerful today, it was inevitable that people would call it a country without a history. This was the so-called heritage. It was also the only thing the United States lacked today. Therefore, after confirming that nuclear bombs could not be used, the military staff decisively turned their attention to Huaxia on the other side of the ocean. Unlike the United States' pale historical heritage, Huaxia had countless talented people since ancient times. Although most of these people were wild cranes, they had always liked to drift with the wind and call the world their home. But this was not a big problem because the international Wu Yin had been established. In the end, Huaxia was still a country that paid attention to human relationships. Even if they were wild cranes, they still had to have their own home, right? Just like when Wang Chunju found out that Chunxi was a cultivator, she would always invite Chunxi to join for various reasons. This was a very good, virtuous cycle. With the support of the country as the foundation, the power of the country gathered the scattered heritages of the people together. And at the same time, these talented people had the opportunity to interact with each other. Just like universities, as long as there were the best teachers in the world, it would naturally attract more and more cultivators to voluntarily join. Therefore, from the moment the Wu Yin was born, its strength continued to grow, and now it had already become the most powerful cultivator organization in the world. Huaxia called them cultivators, while the United States called them superpowered people. The United States lacked the corresponding heritage, so naturally they could not establish a superpowered organization like the Wu Yin. And this was the fundamental reason why the United States vigorously developed exoskeleton armor in recent years. The individual ability of a cultivator was extremely outstanding. Even if it was a single person, it might not be a problem for them to fight against a platoon, a regiment, or even a brigade, but what if they had to fight against an entire country? It should be known that the annual military expenditure of the United States was as high as $700 billion, which was equivalent to half of the total military expenditure of all countries in the world. If the United States were really forced into a corner and threw missiles like scattering flowers, how many could Cheng Hua successfully intercept? 1,000? 10,000? Or 100,000? The true essence in his body was limited. Once the true essence in his body was exhausted, what would Cheng Hua use to resist the continuous bombardment of the army? Of course, the premise was that Cheng Hua wouldn't escape on the cloud-piercing shuttle. Therefore, the United States was not considering whether or not they could take down Cheng Hua. Instead, they were considering the price they would have to pay to take down Cheng Hua. If he really wanted to take Cheng Hua by force, let's not talk about whether he could successfully take him down. Once the war started, the United States would definitely suffer a lot of economic losses. Don't damaged tanks need to be repaired? Doesn't a destroyed town need to be repaired? Don't the people who have been affected by the war need the state to step in and provide subsidies? Behind each bullet was a brand new US dollar bill. Behind every soldier who died in battle, there was also a thick stack of compensation money. This was all money. Did they really think that the United States wouldn't know how to settle scores? It wasn't that they didn't know what to do with Cheng Hua. They just wanted to solve this problem in a simpler way. Cheng Hua wasn't a grinning alien. At first glance, they could basically confirm that he was from Huaxia. Since he was an esper from Huaxia, then naturally Huaxia should step in and take him away. The decision made by the military actually meant that they had given up on this great opportunity to capture an X-level esper alive. Thinking about it carefully, it really did hurt a little. Cheng Hua didn't know what the United States were thinking. After destroying this rapid response team, he put away the sword case and leisurely returned to the small town's market. He wasn't in a hurry. After beating up the naughty kid, wouldn't it give him time to go back and find his father? Thus, he began to wander around the market without a care in the world. There was a convenience store in the market. Cheng Hua picked up a piece of chocolate and tore open the packaging. After thinking that it was some kind of food, he decisively put it into his mouth. What is this? Why is it so delicious? E.g., I found something good. Come down and try it. In the Taiwei enclosure, where industrial development was almost non-existent, there were no such delicious snacks. Therefore, this bite also completely opened the door to a new world for Cheng Hua. French fries, biscuits, candy, cheese, beef, ice cream. The convenience store wasn't big, but it had everything. Cheng Hua ate enthusiastically, but he didn't forget to ask his companions to come down and eat together. This was a major victory for technological civilization. Even if it was a treasure of heaven and earth, it couldn't compare to the small piece of chocolate in Cheng Hua's hand. As a result, the two youths from outer space were completely captivated by the temptation of junk food. The drones sent by the military had been secretly monitoring the two of them. Cheng Hua had already noticed the presence of the drone. However, while chewing gum, he swaggered into a nearby bar without any intention of shooting it down. He was waiting. The United States was also waiting. Time slowly passed by. 2 hours later, a supersonic fighter from Huaxia finally landed at Yellowstone Airport. This was the first time Wu Lian was invited to perform a mission in the United States, so Huaxia attached great importance to this mission. The United States was tens of thousands of kilometers away from Huaxia. If it weren't for the cooperation of the two countries that provided several air refueling services for the fighter within their own jurisdiction, this supersonic fighter wouldn't have been able to arrive at Yellowstone Park in just 2 hours. The mission difficulty was X. Only success was allowed. Failure was not allowed. The person in charge of receiving Huaxia's personnel was the colonel from before. He was now reduced to a commander without an army. So when he heard that Huaxia sent support, an undisguised anger appeared on the colonel's face. Instead of finding a way to solve their own problems, they actually went to the enemy country for help. The colonel was very dissatisfied with the military's arrangement, but due to the orders of his superiors, he had to personally come to greet them. But soon, the dissatisfaction on the colonel's face turned into shock. The military rejected his application for a nuclear bomb, and the last solution they came up with, they actually invited a woman from Huaxia for support. A woman. This was a very beautiful and cold woman. Even though the colonel was used to seeing beauties from different countries, at this moment, he couldn't help but feel stunned. The colonel was slightly distracted. The woman had long been used to his loss of composure. Therefore, After a trace of disgust flashed in her eyes, she coldly said, "Where are they?" She spoke the most standard American English. After the colonel heard this, he suddenly seemed to come back to his senses and xickly extended his hand to invite the woman to the Battle Command Center for a detailed discussion. Based on this situation, this woman should be the person in charge of Huaxia. Reinforcements should still be on the way. The colonel pondered and couldn't help but look up and down at the woman. But what he didn't expect was the woman actually rejected his invitation without any hesitation. No need. After speaking, the woman flew up into the air in front of everyone, and then flew straight to the location of the town. Like a comet, the woman's figure quickly disappeared into the horizon. At this moment, the colonel couldn't help but open his mouth wide. He looked in the direction that the woman disappeared and couldn't help but mutter, "Oh my God, she's Superman." Please remember the domain name of this book.com. Wonderful book mobile version website.com. Chapter 460. There was no doubt about it. This extremely beautiful and cold woman who came all the way from Huaxia was obviously Qin Shiueching, who had just woken up from her coma a few days ago. With such a beautiful and capable daughter, Wang Chuanjiu and Qin Yongwang really benefited a lot from her. As a result, the couple's status in the Wu Lian had been rising steadily in recent years. Qin Shiueching was in charge of external affairs, while Qin Yongwang and his wife were in charge of internal affairs. The family had become a giant within the Wu Lian, and this was without taking into account the mysterious foreign aide, Mr. Chun. Huaxia attached great importance to the United States' request for help this time. So after the Wu Lian received the news, they immediately began to strictly select the candidates for the battle. Qin Shiueching was not the only X-level in the Wu Lian, nor was she the strongest X-level. However, she was the only X-level who took the initiative to apply for the battle. No one knew if Qin Shiueching had eaten gunpowder recently, but after returning to the headquarters in Shangjing, she had a cold face all day long. In addition, she had disappeared for more than a year, so when she came back this time, not many people dared to talk to her. Perhaps it was because of some kind of violence gene hidden in her bones. So after she saw the battle video from the United States, this woman who looked forward to going on a mission all day suddenly couldn't sit still. Before the higher-ups even made a formal decision, Qin Shiueching had already gone to the airport to prepare for departure. Not everyone was as violent as her, and not everyone liked to use war to support war. Since Qin Shiueching wanted to do this kind of thankless task, no one would jump out to compete with her. So, Qin Shiueching set off. Although the enemy in the battle video looked to be only 15 or 16 years old, Qin Shiueching didn't underestimate the enemy at all. Instead, she adjusted her state of mind along the way, hoping to be in the best state to face this mysterious celestial being. This was also the first time she had officially fought someone since breaking through to the celestial being level. Qin Shiueching soon arrived above the town that the colonel had mentioned. Her arrival naturally alarmed the two youths who were drinking in the town's bar. Then with a beer bottle in one hand and a chocolate in the other, Cheng Hua swaggered out of the bar. As soon as he stepped out of the bar, Cheng Hua saw this strange woman with a cold and arrogant face. Qin Shiueching quietly floated above the market. Cheng Hua stood casually at the entrance of the bar. He raised his head slightly and looked at her. Cheng Hua sized up the woman in front of him. Qin Shiueching was also sizing up the young man in front of him. The two stared at each other for a few seconds before Cheng Hua seemed to have thought of something. He couldn't help but grin, and then greeted her in the broken English he had just learned. "Hello?" Hearing this, Qin Shiueching didn't immediately reply. Instead, she frowned slightly. Perhaps it was because she had lived in the same courtyard as Chun Shi for a long time, but Qin Shiueching's perception of true essence was slightly better than other cultivators of the same level. Although this young man in front of her was young, his true essence fluctuations were definitely something that only X-level cultivators could have. X-level, which was the level above the celestial being level. At the same time, it was also known as Golden Core level. Ishi followed Cheng Hua out of the bar. At this moment, A trace of seriousness appeared on Qin Wanqing's face. Two people. There is clearly something wrong with the information provided by the United States. Iji had always been cautious. Even after leaving the cloud-piercing shuttle, he didn't remove the aura concealment technique on his body. Thus, the drone didn't discover his existence at all. Although Qin Xueqing had a strong personality, she wasn't a reckless person. The two young men in front of her had a similar level of cultivation as her. If she had known that this would happen, she would have brought more people with her. However, it was too late to say anything now. The enemy was right in front of her. Running away before the battle was not Qin Xueqing's style. Thus, after hesitating for a moment, she asked coldly, "Where are the two of you from? Who are you from? Why are you causing trouble here today?" Qin Xueqing thought that the two of them were the disciples of some hidden expert. Thus, she didn't hold back. The moment she stepped forward, she acted as if she was going to interrogate them for their crimes. Seeing this, Changhua didn't immediately reply. Instead, he secretly used his divine consciousness to discuss with Yi. This woman's cultivation level seems to be about the same as ours. If that's the case, the inheritance of the Tianshu ruins shouldn't have been lost. The two of them silently discussed. Qin Xueqing's appearance also successfully stopped the two of them from continuing to act presumptuously. Since the Tianshu ruins still had the inheritance of immortal cultivators, they urgently needed to confirm a question. That was, what exactly was the cultivation level of this woman in front of them considered in the Tianshu ruins? If she was just a small fry, then there must be a very powerful sect behind her. Under such circumstances, the two of them could only give up the opportunity to get the first prize and return to the Supreme Palace enclosure to seek help. However, if the cultivation level of this woman in front of them was considered to be one of the best in the Tianshu ruins, didn't that mean that the Tianshu ruins were already in their pockets? The two of them had the cloud-piercing shuttle in their hands. It could be said that they could attack or retreat as they wished. Therefore, after a short discussion, even a usually conservative Yi had the intention of directly taking this woman down. The two of them were still young and had been cultivating in seclusion. Naturally, they didn't understand the beauty of women, let alone what it meant to have tender feelings for the fairer sex. Thus, after the two of them exchanged a look, they suddenly rushed toward Qin Xueqing. "Let's take her down first." "Let's do that." Qin Xueqing had been waiting for them all this time. After seeing the strange expressions of the two of them, she directly raised her essence, energy, and spirit to the peak. Therefore, the moment the two of them moved, Qin Xueqing's movements were actually slightly faster than theirs. Before receiving guidance from Chun Shi, Qin Xueqing was already a grandmaster in the gang state. Therefore, she could be said to have entered the Tao through martial arts. Martial artists mainly focused on close combat, while necromancers were more proficient in long-range combat using the five elements Dharma. Qin Xueqing had been practicing martial arts all her life. Walking, sitting, and lying down were the principles of martial arts. And as she stepped into the realm of oneness of heaven and man, after converting all the vital qi in her body into vital essence, her combat power increased exponentially. It was fine if she didn't move, but once she moved, it was like a thunderbolt breaking through bamboo. Qin Xueqing's figure was slender and graceful. However, when she moved, she was like a fierce tiger coming down from the mountain, instantly setting off a strong and unparalleled momentum. Immortal cultivators were beyond the scope of ordinary people, so it was rare for them to fight in close combat. This could be seen from the situation when Chun Shi fought with others before. Cheng Hua had fought with others many times, but he had never encountered such a way of fighting that focused on close combat. Therefore, when he saw Qin Xueqing pouncing in front of him, Cheng Hua was stunned. This woman doesn't play by the rules. However, in the time it took for him to be distracted, Qin Xueqing directly condensed all the vital essence in her body in her hand, and then slammed hard on Cheng Hua's protective qi in front of his chest. Bang! The moment the vital essence collided, a strong wind suddenly blew over the market, smashing all the houses on the side. Please remember the domain name of this book. Nine Heaven's Divine Emperor mobile version website. Chapter 461. How ferocious would a battle between Golden Core Stage cultivators be? Qin Xueqing didn't have any magic treasures. Her hands and feet were her most powerful weapons. Although she had taught her some pretty good techniques, Qin Xueqing didn't have any intention of learning more about them. She was a martial Dao grandmaster. Even though she had become a diviner, Qin Xueqing was still constantly tempering her martial arts attainments. The highest realm of martial arts was oneness of heaven and man. Oneness of heaven and man was the end of the martial Dao. Qin Xueqing had already reached the end. There was no road ahead. If there was still a path ahead of them, then this path was obviously the immortal road. She had already taught Qin Xueqing the cultivation method. However, due to Qin Xueqing's cold and arrogant temperament, Shi rarely gave her guidance. He would only check on her situation from time to time. As long as there weren't any major problems, Shi didn't bother to stick his hot face to her cold butt. Shi hadn't carefully studied his sister-in-law's situation, so he hadn't discovered it. Qin Xueqing had actually already walked on a different road. The sea was boundless, the sky was the shore, and the mountain was the peak. Immortal cultivation methods were indeed very powerful. There's a world of difference between them and mortal martial arts. However, until today, Qin Xueqing was still very stubborn. She still believed that the martial Dao she had been pursuing all her life had no end. She was a martial Dao grandmaster. After achieving oneness of heaven and man, she was still constantly polishing her martial arts attainments through immortal cultivation methods. Since there was no road ahead, she would walk on a brand new road. Cultivators focused on the cultivation of the soul. Qin Xueqing wanted to do the opposite and focus on the cultivation of the physical body. With this unique cultivation method, who knew what she could do in the future? The reason why she could easily flatten her was that the gap between their realms was too big. If the two of them were put on the same level, would this brother-in-law be able to beat his sister-in-law? This has become a big problem. She had never seriously fought with Qin Xueqing, and Qin Xueqing had never seriously fought with a cultivator of the same realm. Therefore, after seeing Changhua make a slight move, Qin Xueqing immediately used all of her strength. Like a fierce tiger pouncing on its prey, she viciously pounced on Changhua. Like a scholar encountering a soldier, Qin Xueqing's gorgeous and smooth series of attacks stunned Changhua on the spot. He wanted to counterattack, but Qin Xueqing's hands always easily bypassed his defense and easily hit his protective shield. Cultivators rarely experience such a tangled fight. If it weren't for the fact that Changhua had a defensive magic treasure on him, which reduced the majority of Qin Xueqing's strength, Changhua would have been slapped into the ground by Qin Xueqing. Changhua, Yiji watched anxiously from his side. He wanted to help, but the two of them were too close. He was afraid that he would accidentally hurt his companion, so Yiji didn't dare to rashly make a move. However, Changhua wasn't stupid. After dozens of palms, he finally found a gap. At the cost of taking a palm from Qin Xueqing, he successfully shook off Qin Xueqing's entanglement. This time, Changhua finally learned to be smart. When he saw that Qin Xueqing still wanted to go forward, he darted back to Yiji's side and hurriedly took out his sword case from his Sumarum mustard seed bag. Changhua, be careful. This woman's technique is very strange. It seems like she likes to fight in close quarters. As he said that, Yiji also took out his magic treasure. Hearing that, Chenghua's face was full of anger and hatred as he said, I know. I almost fell in her trap just now. Don't interfere first. Let me deal with her. Chenghua's magic treasure was the sword case in his hand. The case was 3 feet long and yellow all over. The tail was inlaid with a group of charred black ornaments, so it was called Phoenix Perch Scorched Tail. It was a 9th grade spirit treasure and was really rare. Once the Phoenix Perch Scorched Tail case was in his hand, the battle flames in Chenghua's heart immediately burned fiercely. Don't look at how Qin Xueqing's palm technique made him unable to fight back at all. In reality, Changhua didn't suffer any substantial damage at all. After all, Qin Xueqing's current moves were figured out by herself. Now that she was still at the stage of deliberation, how powerful could they be? It was like a boorish man with nothing but brute strength. So even if Qin Xueqing had an extraordinary accumulation of vital essence, she still couldn't fully utilize the power of this vital essence. After a bout of fruitless fighting, Qin Xueqing clearly understood her disadvantage. Therefore, she didn't want to give Changhua any chance to catch his breath and directly rushed over again. But this time, Changhua, who was already prepared, directly threw out the sword case in his hand. Different from Qin Shi's all swords in one, the small metal swords in the Phoenix Perch Scorched Tail case were all real objects. Each of the small metal swords could freely attack under the guidance of Chenghua's divine telekinesis. The sword case was the mother sword, and the small swords were the child swords. The child swords were kept in the mother sword and constantly nourished, while the small swords were infinite. And this was the so-called hidden swords in the case. Of course, with Chenghua's current cultivation, he actually couldn't control all the child swords in the sword case as he wished. But this was already enough. Attack! At Chenghua's command, countless small metal swords instantly flew out of the Phoenix Perch Scorched Tail case. These small swords were like crows, covering half the sky the moment they appeared. Seeing this, Qin Xueqing was calm and unafraid. Although she didn't have any Dharma treasures, her martial intent was already above that of ordinary Dharma treasures. Afraid before the battle? Impossible. Forever impossible. If she was afraid, then she wouldn't be her. Qin Xueqing poured all the vital essence in her body into her limbs and bones, and her body instantly became as hard as iron. Her joints moved, and her whole body immediately emitted bursts of thunder. And this was the performance of martial art cultivation at the peak, bones and tendons piercing, tiger leopard thunder. And as Qin Xueqing punched out, an ear-piercing sound suddenly rang in the air. Streams of vital essence visible to the naked eye were like tornadoes, instantly knocking away all the small metal swords in front of her. Facing the sky, full of sword rain, Qin Xueqing angrily went against the flow. At this moment, she was like an unsheathed sword. She actually tore a crack in the sky, full of sword rain. Oof, still barehanded at this time. Are you here to die? Seeing that she still didn't take out her Dharma treasures under such circumstances, Changhua instantly made a judgment in his heart. Tianshu ruins, as expected, it still declined. The woman in front of him, with a decent cultivation, but an ordinary cultivation method, was probably the only powerhouse in the Tianshu ruins that could be taken out. Otherwise, how could she not be able to take out even a suitable magical artifact? Thinking of this, Changhua couldn't help but have a fierce look in his eyes. He immediately clasped his hands in front of his chest, and then quickly formed a hand seal. Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heavens Divine Emperor Mobile Version Reading Website. Chapter 462. At that moment, thousands of small swords seemed to have turned into a huge dragon made of metal blades. Countless sharp blades shone with cold light under the sun. The densely packed, small metal swords covered most of the sky. Under Chenghua's command, these small metal swords were like obedient fish. They gathered together, and the tip of the sword was pointed at Qin Wanqing, who was charging towards him at high speed. Seeing the flying swords like rain, Qin Xueqing was not afraid at all. She brazenly faced them with her bare hands. Warriors did not need weapons because their bodies were the most powerful weapons. Qin Xueqing infused her vital essence into her limbs and bones, so that a layer of faint light appeared on her originally slightly white skin. From a distance, she was like a bodhisattva carefully carved out of cold jade. It was exactly like the old saying in books: skin of ice, bones of jade, makeup of jade. Do not fear the angry eyes of the bodhisattva. Although Qin Xueqing's momentum was strong, but it was a pity that her exploration of martial arts was still at the beginning stage. Now, with only her mortal body, How could she resist Chung Hua's phoenix perch scorchtail box? Countless small metal swords kept hitting Qin Shueqing's protective shield. At first, Qin Wanqing could still rely on the quintessential essence in her body to repel the small swords. However, as wave after wave of flying swords continued to attack, Qin Wanqing's protective shield couldn't help but begin to weaken. Soon, a small metal sword successfully pierced through her protective shield. Qin Shueqing could not dodge in time. This small sword immediately left a shallow wound on her face. This was just the beginning. As soon as the protective shield was broken, the small metal swords swarmed up like crazy bees. Seeing this, Qin Shueqing decisively abandoned her own defense. At the price of sacrificing the protective shield, she instantly increased her speed by a lot. Of course, the result of this was obvious. Countless small wounds suddenly appeared on Qin Shueqing's body. Chung Hua had been deliberately keeping a distance from Qin Shueqing. Every time Qin Shueqing took a step forward, he would decisively take a step back. Seeing Qin Shueqing suddenly accelerate, Chung Hua didn't react in time, and Qin Shueqing successfully closed in on him. "Bitch, do you really think I'm afraid of you?" Chung Hua was also quite experienced in facing enemies. Seeing that Qin Shueqing was too strong, he didn't panic at all. A fierce look flashed in his eyes, and then he suddenly pulled out a 3-feet-long sword from the Phoenix Perch Scorchtail case. This was the primordial sword, and also one of the most important parts of the Phoenix Perch Scorchtail case. Very few people knew about the existence of the primordial sword. Ever since Chung Hua obtained the Phoenix Perch Scorchtail box, he had been using it as a killing move. Please answer. Please answer. Whether it was Huaxia or the United States, the satellites of the two countries had been monitoring the small town from afar. But because Chung Hua and Qin Shueqing both had vital essence protecting their bodies, the satellites couldn't directly capture the situation of their battle. Now that the battle was over, Qin Shueqing's figure finally appeared on the surveillance satellite. The keyhole satellites of the United States had reached a resolution of 0.05 meters. They could basically see license plates directly, so the moment Qin Shueqing appeared, the surveillance satellite immediately locked onto her. However, the moment she saw the big screen, Wang Chunju was stunned. She saw Qin Shueqing lying in the ruins, covered in blood. Her clothes were stained with blood, and at the same time, her face was also blurred. She just lay quietly in the ruins of the small town. She didn't move at all. No one knew whether she was dead or alive. Qin Shueqing. At that moment, Wang Chunju felt as if she had been struck by lightning. She couldn't even stand properly. If it weren't for the staff members' quick reflexes, this famous Iron Lady would have fallen to the ground on the spot. Qin Shueqing had lost. This news seemed to have grown wings. It didn't take long for the news to spread all over the Wulian. Wang Chunju sat on the chair with a dull look in her eyes. Although she liked power, she wasn't the kind of ruthless person who would abandon her family for power. Qin Shueqing had only fought with her permission, because she had confidence in her daughter. Who would have thought the result would be like this? At that moment, Wang Chunju's heart was dead. "Leader, why don't you rest for a while? The higher-ups have already sent reinforcements. The 3 big shots are moving together. They should be able to make it. Director Qin is strong. Even if she's injured, it's not a big deal. You don't know the exact situation here, so don't worry too much. We have to have confidence in Director Qin." The staff carefully comforted Wang Chunju. However, Wang Chunju seemed to have lost her soul. She stared at the screen without moving. After a long while, she seemed to have suddenly thought of something. She actually jumped up from the chair excitedly. The staff at the side was shocked by Wang Chunju's actions. He was about to go up and comfort her when Wang Chunju pushed him away. Then, she quickly took out her phone from the cabinet. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com, Wonderful Book House. Chapter 463. These few days, Chunxi's life was quite fulfilling. In addition to taking care of the little girl's daily life, he also had to be careful not to let his wife get lost. Speaking of which, Qin Ruoying was really like an old person with Alzheimer's. She didn't talk much. Every day, after sending the little girl to school with Chun Shi, she would wander aimlessly on the streets. No matter how Chan Shi tried to strike up a conversation with her, Qin Ruoying didn't care at all. They used to be very close, but now they were gradually drifting apart. Of course, these seemingly estranged situations were, in fact, only superficial. In fact, every time when the little girl was out of school, Chun Shi only had to say that Nian was out of school, and Qin Ruoying would immediately stop and look back at him silently. At this time, Chun Shi would immediately call for a taxi, and then the couple would take a taxi back to school to pick up the little girl. Day after day, the cycle repeated itself. Although Chun Shi was still a little worried about Qin Ruoying's situation, he didn't panic because of this. Anyway, the soul mirror was in his hands, and Yuhuan Tianzuan was imprisoned in Saturn Ring by him. They had been separated for too long, and now that they were finally reunited, how could Chun Shi leave so easily? In addition, the soul mirror seemed to have run out of energy recently. No matter how he tried, the soul mirror didn't respond. Therefore, Chun Shi planned to wait for a while until his life gradually stabilized. Then he would find time to return to Saturn Ring to have a good chat with Yuhuan Tianzuan. At that time, wouldn't Yingying's situation be solved? But then again, after returning home this time, Chun Shi obviously felt that his life was a little different from before. The reason was the little girl. Nian was more than 6 years old. Generally, from this time onwards, the burden on the shoulders of the parents would become a lot lighter. After all, the child spent half of her time in school every day. The school shared a portion of the responsibility for the parents, so the parents naturally didn't have to work as hard as before. At this stage, the child's academic performance and performance in school would become the main concern of every parent. And what was Nian's greatest strength? Wasn't she smart and sensible? Whenever the school arranged an exam, the little guy's results would always be the first in his grade. As for her performance in school, there was no need to mention it. Some time ago, at the request of the school, the teacher gave each child in the class an application form for joining the Young Pioneers. After Nian submitted her application, the school quickly approved it. Because they were still in the first grade, there were only 10 places in each class. With Nian's usual performance, there was naturally no problem for her to enter the first batch. Therefore, as the class monitor, she led her classmates to stand under the national flag and made a declaration to join the team. At the same time, she stood on the podium with the same batch of young pioneers and sang the Young Pioneers song. We are the successors of communism. Inherit the glorious tradition of our revolutionary forefathers. Love the motherland, love the people, a bright red scarf fluttering in front of our chests. Needless to say, from then on, the way her classmates looked at her was a little different. Perhaps it was because Nian had hit someone when she first entered the school, so the children in the class were a little afraid of her. After she became a young pioneer and wore a bright red scarf, her classmates were no longer so afraid of her. Instead, they became very respectful of her. Although she was the class monitor, she never tattled to the teacher, because even the most mischievous of classmates didn't dare to jump in front of her. Nian almost became the leader of the class. Whenever her classmates went overboard during class or made loud noises during self-study, she only needed to glare fiercely at them, and the students she stared at would instantly wilt like eggplants that had been hit by frost. All of these behaviors were seen by the teacher, who didn't like outstanding children. Although Nian was only a first-grade student by the time she reached the second grade, the title of 3 good students was basically guaranteed. Nian was so worry-free, so Chun Shi naturally didn't have to worry too much. Therefore, as the child grew up day by day, he, as the father, became more and more free. On this day, Chun Shi sent Nian to school, as usual. When he was about to leave, he happened to meet Nian's class teacher. The teacher pulled him aside and praised him, which almost made Chun Shi burst out laughing. Yingying, did you hear that? Every teacher is praising our Nian. This child is really becoming more and more sensible. After parting with the teacher, Chun Shi was still very proud of himself. Qin Ruoying walked quickly in front, and he bragged about his daughter's excellence behind her. There was a detail here that was worth noting. In the past, Chunshi could only hang about 10 meters behind Qin Ruoying. He didn't expect that after a few days, he would be able to stick to Qin Ruoying's 2 to 3 meters behind her. Qin Ruoying's attitude towards him didn't seem to change much, but the distance between the two was constantly closing. Therefore, he successfully climbed onto Ying's bed. This became Chunxi's main goal at the moment. In order to achieve this goal as soon as possible, Chunxi worked hard. And the little sweetness that constantly emerged in the process of this struggle was really not worth mentioning to outsiders. Ying, you went to Dongxiamen yesterday. Hey, that's Pan Garden. You've been there too. Look, you've already walked around this ring. Why don't I'll take you to the Summer Palace today, okay? That place used to be a royal garden. There are mountains and rivers, and there's a lot of vegetation. It's much better than this reinforced concrete. Qin Ruoying didn't speak the whole time. No matter how Chunshi tried to talk to her, she acted as if she didn't hear him. However, when Chunshi gave her directions, Qin Ruoying reacted, so she didn't continue to walk down Chang'an Avenue. Qin Ruoying stopped walking, as if she was thinking about where she should go now. Seeing this, Chunshi suddenly thought of something and quickly added, "Oh yeah, I've taken Yin there before. She really likes it there, so I guess you'll like it too." Hearing this, Qin Ruoying turned around and looked at him. She seemed to be moved by Chunxi's suggestion, so for the first time ever, she said, "Let's go." Okay. Chunshi was overjoyed. He quickly waved his hand to hail a taxi. Then he helped Qin Ruoying into the car. However, just as he was excitedly introducing Summer Palace to Qin Ruoying, an ear-piercing ringtone suddenly rang. "Hey, Ying, hold on. I need to take this call." Chunshi picked up the phone, but there was no number displayed on it. He hesitated for a moment, then considering that he usually didn't receive any harassing calls, the caller should be someone he knew. So he finally pressed the answer button. "Hello? Who is this?" "Chunshi. It's me. Second aunt." As soon as the call connected, Wang Chunju's slightly anxious voice sounded from the other end of the phone. When Chunshi heard the sobbing tone in her voice, she immediately frowned and asked, "Auntie, what's wrong? Did something happen?" Qin was injured by someone. Those people might even take her life. "Second aunt, I beg you, please save Qin. Please remember the domain name of this book.com, Wonderful Book House. Com." Chapter 464. Something happened to Qin. The moment she heard this, even she couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. His sister-in-law had only left home for a few days. How could something have happened to her? She was well aware of Qin Shiueching's abilities. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that even if his sister-in-law met Jiang Yan, she could still barely last 2 or 3 moves against him. Although his sister-in-law was no match for Jiang Yan, if Jiang Yan really wanted to take her down, he would still have to put in a lot of effort. After all, Qin Shiueching was a cultivator at the Golden Core stage. If she couldn't beat him, wouldn't she know how to run? Could it be that her bad temper was acting up again? Why did he end up in such a hopeless situation? Because he had to compete with others. Wang Chunju had always been strong. Now that she was calling Chunshi, her voice sounded like she was about to cry. So even if Chunshi used his but to think, he could tell that the situation might be serious. Even if the entire Wu Yin family was mobilized, they probably wouldn't be able to solve this problem in a short period of time. His sister-in-law was family after all. Chunshi naturally couldn't refuse. Thus, he quickly replied, "Second aunt, don't worry. Send me the location. I'll rush over and see what's going on." Okay. After hanging up, Wang Chunju immediately sent the location of the town to Chunxi's phone. At this moment, Chunshi seemed to suddenly remember something. He quickly said to Qin Ruoying, "Ying, something happened to Qin. I have to go and see." Qin Ruoying glanced at him indifferently. She didn't seem to know who Qin was at all. Sigh. Seeing her cold expression, Chunshi could only shake his head and sigh. What should he do? Bring Ying with him? She probably wouldn't agree at all. But if he left Ying here alone, Chunshi would feel a little uncomfortable. He wasn't really afraid that Ying would get lost, but he was afraid that she would feel lonely. In such a big city like Shangjing, she was unfamiliar with the people and the place. Where could she go by herself? She was a little hesitant. Qin Ruoying seemed to have suddenly understood his difficulties. She suddenly said, "You go, I'll go by myself." Just 7 words. This was the longest sentence that Qin Ruoying had said to Chunshi during this period of time. Hearing this, Chunshi couldn't help but smile. After he quickly signaled the driver to stop by the side, he quietly left a restriction on Qin Ruoying. At the same time, he didn't forget to remind her, "Ying, don't run around. I'll come back to find you as soon as I'm done here." Nian gets out of school at 4 o'clock. We'll pick her up together. You know that kid's temper. If she doesn't see you after school, she'll definitely be angry with me again. Chunshi leaned on the car door and kept muttering. When the driver was a little impatient, he reluctantly got up and waved goodbye to Qin Ruoying. "Oh, right, Ying, I put a lot of cash in my bag. If you see anything you like, buy anything, don't save money. It's okay if you run out of cash. You have a payment app on your phone. There's money in it." The taxi gradually went away. She was still standing on the side of the road. He kept waving in the direction of the car. It was only a temporary separation, but he made it seem like a separation of life and death. This made the passers-by stunned. It wasn't until the car merged into the traffic and completely disappeared from his sight that Chunshi slowly retracted her arm and turned to walk into a side alley. At this time, Qin Ruoying, who had already left in the car, seemed to have just noticed the wallet that Chunshi deliberately put on the seat. She picked up the wallet and opened it. Good Lord, it was full of $100 bills. The wallet was stuffed to the brim. It was as if it was not filled with money at all, but with Chunshi's concern for her. "Girl, I can see that your husband is really good to you. It's rare to see a man as considerate as him these days. You two have children already, right? Uncle is experienced. Husband and wife quarrel at the head of the bed, but make up at the end. So, I'll take the liberty of advising you. It's about time you give him a way out. This man, although loosening and tightening can firmly tie his heart, you have to do it in moderation, right?" The driver was an old man. He had been secretly observing the two of them ever since they got on the car. According to his understanding, this must be a young couple having a conflict. So he smiled and put in a good word for Chunshi. Qin Ruoying sat in the back without saying anything, so the driver did not notice that a faint smile had already appeared on her lips. In the sky above the small town, after Cheng Huat detonated the Phoenix perched charred tail box to knock down Qin Xueqing, he and Yi discussed how to deal with this woman. Why don't we just kill her? Although he succeeded in seriously injuring Qin Xueqing, Cheng Hua actually did not feel good. After all, he took a solid hit from that palm. So Qin Xueqing's true essence kept wreaking havoc in his body. This true essence was extremely rich. Not only did it disrupt his breathing, but it also left some internal injuries in his body. It was a good thing that Qin Ruoying did not have a magic weapon. Otherwise, this palm would have directly hit his internal organs and caused him to be in pain. No, we haven't figured out the details of the Tianshu ruins yet. We can't kill her so rashly. Yi reached out to stop Cheng Hua. After thinking for a while, he frowned and continued. The commotion just now was too big, and you're already injured. Since the inheritance of the Tianshu ruins is still there, then we should do things more safely. Now that the enemy is in the dark and we're in the light, it's a big taboo for a military strategist. So let's take this woman and retreat first. Find a place to wait for you to recover first. Yi's analysis was very reasonable. After hearing this, Cheng Hua thought for a while, then nodded and replied, "Okay, I'll listen to you, but where should we go now? Where should we go?" His voice fell. Not only was Yi stunned, but even Cheng Hua, who said this, was stunned. Because the first "where should we go" was said by him, but the second "where should we go" was definitely not said by him. The two "where should we go" sounded almost at the same time. Cheng Hua and Yi were stunned for a full 2 or 3 seconds. Then they lowered their heads to look at the source of the sound. They saw a strange man suddenly appear in the ruins of the town. The man stood so casually beside Qin Xueqing, but Cheng Hua and Yi did not know when he came. "Who are you?" Cheng Hua was shocked and subconsciously wanted to attack this man. But at this time, Yi pulled him behind him, then directly took out his life source magic weapon, the Tian Luo umbrella. Once the Tian Luo umbrella was taken out, it was like a cloud suddenly shrouded the ruins. The sky instantly darkened. Yi's expression was stern. Almost without any hesitation, he directly launched the fiercest attack on this man. And the first move was a killing move. Crown Cloud Shadow, hidden killing intent. The Tian Luo umbrella expanded at the speed of the naked eye, then like a large net, from top to bottom, directly enveloped the man. Seeing this, the man chuckled coldly. "Didn't the teacher teach you? Children are disobedient. You'll get beaten up. This is too much. Once I start writing my daily routine, I say I'm water. Then I'll have to trouble you big bosses. Next time you see someone leave a comment saying I'm only a cultivator and not a stay-at-home dad, help me explain properly. This is King Water. How am I going to write my daily routine? The above is all a joke. To be honest, I've greatly reduced the daily routine. Now I'm writing the main content. It's fine to say I'm water, but at least I'm writing with a purpose. In any case, it's more than 1,000,000 words. I can't just write a chapter over and over every day, right? But if I continue to cut it, then I really won't have a daily routine. After all, I can't have my cake and eat it too. This is all I can do. Please remember the domain name of this book.com. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 465. This man who had appeared out of nowhere was obviously Chun Shi. Huaxia was about 12,000 kilometers away from the United States. It would take about 20 hours to get there by civilian airliner. That sounded very far away, but with Chun Shi's current level of cultivation, that distance was nothing. In his words, he could just walk out the door and take a turn to get there. The so-called true meaning of the word void included the concept of space. Therefore, it also made space jumping a method of travel that could be controlled by immortal cultivators. This was a qualitative change. It also marked that cultivators had officially stepped into the third stage from the second stage. And this third stage was understanding and using the laws of heaven and earth. Compared to Yi, Cheng Hua's reaction was much slower. Chun Shi had appeared right under their noses. Cheng Hua didn't understand the crux of the matter. Instead, he stared blankly at the person in front of him. "Cheng Hua, we can't stay here for long. I'll hold him back. You go and activate the cloud-piercing shuttle. Hurry." Everything happened in the blink of an eye. Yi immediately used his best move. At the same time, he pushed Cheng Hua far away. At this time, Cheng Hua seemed to have just woken up. He finally understood that the cultivation of the person in front of him was definitely far above theirs. Otherwise, how could they not have known when this person had arrived? The heavenly Luo umbrella covered the ruins of the town. From afar, it looked like a black umbrella had been placed on a pile of building models. This was an 8th-grade spirit artifact, the heavenly Luo umbrella. Although the grade of this magic weapon was 1 grade lower than that of Xiang Hua's Phoenix Perch Scorched Tail box, its actual power was slightly stronger than that of the box. After all, it was a complete artifact. It wasn't a combined artifact like the Phoenix Perch Charred Tail box. Naturally, it was easier to use. Although the two of them usually bickered, the boat of friendship could capsize easily. When they were in real danger, Yi didn't hesitate at all. He immediately shielded Cheng Hua behind him and used all his strength to cover his retreat. This mysterious man in front of him was too scary. This was because Yi couldn't sense any trace of true qi fluctuations from him. What did this mean? This meant that this person's cultivation level had reached perfection. He wasn't someone the two of them could deal with. And this was clearly the true danger hidden in the Tianshu ruins. At that moment, many thoughts flashed through Yi's mind. He regretted not stopping Cheng Hua. But as soon as this thought appeared in his mind, Yi felt a black shadow flash in front of him. And then his buttocks were ruthlessly kicked by someone. Who told you to be disobedient? Who told you to be unscrupulous? Since your parents didn't educate you properly, Uncle will educate you on behalf of your parents today. He was a golden core cultivator, but now he was like a child who had made a big mistake and was being punished by his parents. Chen, she kicked Yi far away. Yi was stunned. He endured the pain from his but and looked down at the Tianluo umbrella. Then he pointed at Chun Shi and exclaimed as if he had seen a ghost. How did you escape? Once the Tianluo umbrella was opened, nothing could escape. Right now, the heavenly Luo umbrella was perfectly fine above the ruins, but Chun Shi suddenly appeared behind him like a ghost. How could Yi not be shocked? Qi refining, foundation establishment, golden core, Yuanying, soul formation, Dongshu from golden core to Dongshu. There were several big realms between. Therefore, in Chun Shi's eyes, Changhua and Yi were two naughty kids who hadn't even grown their hair yet. The two of them were not old, about 15 or 16 years old. Cultivators had the ability to slow down aging and retain their youth, but this was also based on a solid foundation of cultivation. Therefore, it was obvious that their background was not simple. In order to facilitate the interrogation later, Chun Shi did not kill them directly. Instead, he used a more gentle way of physical punishment. But the young man was very proud. How could he be willing to endure such humiliation? When Chun Shi kicked Yi's but for the third time, Yi could not help but explode. Damn it! You deserve to die! With a loud shout, Yi, who had always been elegant and cautious, was now like a mad bull, fiercely charging at Chun Shi. Yi's courage was commendable, but unfortunately, anger could not solve any problems. Seeing Yi's expression of wanting to eat him alive, Chun Shi could not help but laugh coldly. Yi's speed, which he was so proud of, was as slow as a turtle in Chun Shi's eyes. Therefore, when Yi aggressively rushed in front of Chun Shi did not care what move he used. He raised his hand and slapped him. Pah! With one slap, Yi was slapped until the sky turned dark and he saw stars. Like a spinning top that was whipped, Yi quickly spun a few rounds in the air before falling heavily. Kid, Uncle will give you a word of advice today. A young man who has achieved success should not be arrogant. You still have a long way to go. As he spoke, Chun Shi looked back at Changhua, who had already flown far away. Naughty children had to be educated one by one. His sister-in-law was seriously injured, so Chun Shi naturally would not let the two of them go so easily. Now that Yi had fallen to the ground and could not get up, where could Changhua run to? Thinking of this, Chun Shi could not help but smile. He straightened his fingers and pointed his sword at Changhua. However, just as he was about to shoot out the sword light, Changhua suddenly let out a fierce howl. Immediately after, a strange-looking ship with a dragon head at the bow and a phoenix tail at the stern appeared out of thin air above the town. This time, it was Chun Shi's turn to be stunned. He did not put these two naughty children in his eyes at all, so after coming here, he was too lazy to use his divine sense to carefully scan the surroundings. Who would have thought? How could there be such a strange ship hidden right under his nose? Xingcha. Xingcha was an essential item for cultivators to travel the starry sky. Due to its size and use, Xingcha had already surpassed the category of ordinary magic treasures. This item was extremely rare. On one hand, it required too many materials. On the other hand, it required at least the cultivation of the Dongshu stage to refine Xingcha. Just the latter point alone meant that Xingcha was destined to be precious. Chun Shi knew what was good for him. Thus, the moment he saw the cloud-piercing shuttle appear, he seemed to have suddenly thought of something. He could not help but look at Yi with an astonished expression and hurriedly asked, "You two are not from Earth?" Chun Shi was somewhat bewildered, but Changhua was not idle. After climbing onto the cloud-piercing shuttle, Changhua directly slapped a spirit stone on the control panel. Then, he turned the ship around and rushed towards Yi. Yi, let's go. Please remember the domain name of this book. .com. Wonderful Book House. Com. Chapter 466. It was no wonder that Chun Shi would be surprised. After all, this was a Xingcha. This item was a must-have item for cultivators when traveling or killing people. Based on Earth's current situation, it was obviously impossible to produce such a high-end item like Xingcha. Could it be an antique left behind from the ancient times? Chun-Shi carefully observed the Xingcha in front of him and realized that its condition was extremely good. From the outside, there was almost no wear and tear. If he were to use the jargon of the second-hand car market to describe it, then this Xingcha was obviously a new car. It was impossible for it to be an antique that had been buried in the soil for tens of thousands of years. After eliminating this possibility, the problem was naturally simple. This Xingcha in front of him, either it came from Tiandu or it came from the distant outer space. The former was almost impossible because Tiandu had already been destroyed by Chun-Shi. Yuhuan Tianzuan and his family were still watching the stars on Saturn's ring. Thus, there was only one last possibility left. However, in that instant, countless thoughts flashed through Chun-Shi's mind. Taking advantage of Chun-Shi's momentary daze, Cheng-Hua drove the cloud-piercing shuttle and directly caught Yi from below. Then, they flew into the distance like a wisp of smoke. This set of actions could be said to be like moving clouds and flowing water. The overall coordination could be said to be flawless. Just like that, the two of them put on an extremely gorgeous performance of running for their lives right under Chun-Shi's nose. The moment Yi boarded the ship, the cloud-piercing shuttle speed was instantly pushed to the limit by Cheng-Hua. If it wasn't for the fact that the mid-grade spirit stone couldn't support the cloud-piercing shuttle space jump, Cheng-Hua would probably have escaped to the moon by now. When the cloud-piercing shuttle rushed out of the stratosphere, the two of them instantly widened their field of vision. Only then did Cheng-Hua look at Yi silently, with a look of lingering fear. Perhaps it was because they were lucky enough to escape death, but now, the two of them seemed to be in a somewhat depressed mood. Neither of them had the intention to speak. The two of them stared at each other in silence. After a long while, Yi felt that the atmosphere was a little strange, so he couldn't help but break the silence. The two of us are lucky to be able to escape this time. Yi's tone was filled with relief. When Cheng-Hua heard this, he was like an eggplant that had been hit by frost. His hands gripped the rudder tightly, and he remained silent, even though he wasn't the one getting beaten up. However, the image of Chun-Shi toying with Yi was still like a nightmare that lingered in his heart and did not subside for a long time. That man was really too scary. He could actually pinch Yi in his hand and play with him as he pleased. From this, it could be seen how high this person's cultivation was. This matter had completely exceeded the scope of Cheng-Hua's imagination, so much so that he didn't even dare to think about it any further. After all, young people had always been impulsive. Usually, they would only realize fear after killing someone. Cheng-Hua was in such a situation now. When he thought about his rash actions, Cheng-Hua felt as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over his head. He only felt a chill run down his spine. He blamed himself for his ignorance and recklessness. When Yi saw this, he didn't reprimand him. Instead, he pretended to be relaxed and comforted him. "Haven't we already escaped? What are you still afraid of? Don't worry, I still have a high-grade spirit stone here. Even if that person wants to chase us, he definitely won't be able to catch up to us." As he spoke, Yi took out the high-grade spirit stone that he had kept for a long time. He raised the spirit stone, indicating that Cheng-Hua didn't need to worry. However, at this moment, an extremely abrupt voice suddenly rang out from the cloud-piercing shuttle. "Is that so?" The moment he heard this voice, the smile on Yi's face froze. He turned his head stiffly. Following the direction of the voice, he saw the weird uncle who always hit people's buttocks. At this moment, wasn't he standing proudly at the stern of the shuttle with a faint smile on his face? You what? Call me uncle." Chun-Shi rudely interrupted Yi's words. However, he didn't give Yi a chance to speak again. With a light wave of his sleeve, he directly pressed the two youths who were about to fight onto the deck of the shuttle. "That's enough. Stop struggling. The two of you have been captured by me." Chun-Shi's appearance also officially announced that the two youths' escape plan had failed. Then, the cloud-piercing shuttle turned around and headed back to Earth. Unlike when they first arrived, The two youths on the shuttle were now like two roosters who had lost a fight. They lowered their heads and obediently knelt in front of Chen-Shi. Looking at how defeated they were now, they probably wouldn't be able to be proud in the future. Xianyuan Chenghua, Dongfang Yiji, right? After a series of torture with spanking as the main punishment, Chen-Shi successfully got the names of the two youths. Both of them had two surnames. One was Xianyuan, and the other was Dongfang. It sounded like it had a special charm. Okay, now that I know your names, tell me more about the Supreme Palace enclosure. Chen-Shi used to be so focused on returning to Earth that he didn't notice at all. There was a place called the Supreme Palace enclosure at the edge of the solar system. Therefore, when Chen-Shi heard this name from Yi, his interest was instantly piqued. Supreme Palace enclosure? What kind of place was that? Since the Supreme Palace enclosure was at the edge of the solar system, why didn't other cultivators come to Earth before? Chen-Shi was a little confused. Therefore, he pondered this question while waiting for the two to answer. However, what he didn't expect was, after hearing his question, Chenghua and Yi immediately looked at each other. Neither of them had any intention of answering. I'm asking you a question. Seeing this, Chen-Shi didn't hold back. He lifted his leg and gave both of them a kick in the buttocks. One look, and one could tell that the two of them were very proud people. People with such personalities were usually amenable to coaxing, but not coercion. But regrettably, they just had to meet Chen-Shi today. What kind of personality did Chen-Shi have? What a coincidence. It just so happened that he was also amenable to coaxing, but not coercion. Chen-Shi didn't waste any time talking nonsense with them. Not going to speak, right? Then I'll kick you until you speak. Bang, bang, bang. Muffled sounds could be heard from the cloud-piercing shuttle. Chen-Shi kicked them one after another. Luckily, their cultivation levels weren't low. Otherwise, their flesh would have been torn apart by Chen-Shi's kicks. Of course, to these two unlucky kids, being beaten up was a small matter. Being humiliated was a big deal. The two of them had never been humiliated like this since they were young. Therefore, after being kicked by Chen-Shi more than 10 times, Chenghua finally stopped cowering like a quail. He straightened his neck and shouted angrily, "Don't blame me for not warning you. I, Xianyuan Chenghua, swear right here and now, if you kick my buttocks one more time, I will definitely cut you into 1,000 pieces." Oh, hearing this, Chen-Shi couldn't help but laugh. He laughed as he walked in front of Chenghua. He reached out and patted Chenghua's cheek. Then, he asked jokingly, "Are you angry?" Chenghua didn't say anything. He wanted to spit at Chen-Shi, but he was trapped by Chen-Shi's true yuan. Other than answering the question honestly, he couldn't do anything else. "If you're angry, then hit me. You even swore that you would cut me into 1,000 pieces. Ha ha. Little guy, are you a clown sent by the monkeys?" At this moment, Chen-Shi no longer had the demeanor of an expert. He laughed proudly, and his words were full of ridicule and mockery. When had Chenghua ever been humiliated like this? As a result, this young man, who had always wanted to compete with the saints of the all heavens, broke down on the spot. The rims of his eyes turned red, and in front of Chen-Shi and Yi, tears silently fell from his eyes. Chapter 467. You're crying? Seeing Chenghua suddenly cry, Chen-Shi couldn't help but sigh in his heart. The psychological quality of young people these days was really bad. That's enough. What's a man like you crying for? Someone like you still dares to go around and do evil? It would have been better if Chen-Shi hadn't said that. Now that he did, Chenghua's tears were like floodwaters that had been opened. He couldn't stop them. While Chenghua was crying like a girl, Yiji's eyes were darting around nonstop. He saw that Chen-Shi didn't seem to have any intention of harming their lives, so he mustered up his courage and begged for mercy. "Sir, we know our mistakes. Sir, please be magnanimous. Can you let us go today? I promise. We definitely won't barge into the Tianshu ruins again." Tianshu ruins? Chen-Shi softly repeated this name. Then, he flicked his sleeves and turned to walk to the helm of the ship. "You've caused such a huge mess, and you still want to leave? I can ignore the grudges between you and the United States, but Do you know who the woman you injured is? Hearing this, Iji's heart skipped a beat. Then he asked anxiously, who? She's my sister-in-law. After saying that, Chunshi didn't give Iji a chance to explain. He directly used his inner energy to lift the two of them off the cloud-piercing shuttle. The cloud-piercing shuttle had already returned to the ruins of the small town. When Chunshi had arrived, he had already helped Qin Xueqing suppress her injuries. So, in the time it took for them to return, Qin Xueqing had already shakily stood up from the ground. It had to be said that her sister-in-law's current appearance was quite pitiful. What she was wearing was just the most common training suit. It was neither a defensive magical equipment nor a high-tech cloth that could not be torn or broken. Therefore, after being bombarded by Cheng Hua at such close range, Qin Xueqing's training clothes were only left with a few rags. Blood continuously gushed out from the hideous wound. The dark red blood splattered on her snow-white skin, like plum blossoms blooming at the peak of a snowy mountain. Fortunately, the phoenix perch scorched tail box had exploded behind her, leaving her with a few pieces of cloth to cover up her embarrassment. But even so, his sister-in-law had exposed herself today. As for whether or not she had peeked at him when she came, only the heavens would know. Do you have any healing elixirs? Give it to me. Chunshi didn't stand on ceremony with these two brats. Although he told them to take it themselves, in reality, he directly took out a summer mustard pouch from each of them. Seeing this, Iji couldn't help but open his mouth, intending to take the initiative to take medicine for Chunshi in exchange for better treatment as a captive. That was because the calf didn't know how scary a tiger was. Once it realized how scary a tiger was, how could it not be afraid? Looking at the mysterious man in front of him, then looking at the woman who was covered in wounds, a sense of despair instantly spread rapidly in Iji's heart. It's over. This time it's really all because of you. Back to the Aote Nebula. Just as Chunghua and Iji were captured by Chunshi, a gigantic Xingcha arrived at the place where the two of them had been before. Compared to Chunghua's Xingcha, the Xingcha in front of them was like a cruiser. There were many people standing on the ship. As soon as the Xingcha stopped, a man who was obviously the leader turned around and walked into the cabin. Second, madam, we're here. There was a very beautiful woman sitting in the cabin. She was about 30 or 40 years old, but she didn't look old at all. Furthermore, the unique charm of a mature woman gave her an indescribable and strange charm. The man didn't seem to dare to look at the woman. As soon as he entered the cabin, he quickly lowered his head and silently waited for the woman to speak. However, the woman didn't say anything. She got up and walked to the window. After looking through the window at the densely packed meteorites outside, she suddenly thought of something and couldn't help but ask softly, "This is the place where Hua was last seen?" Second, madam, yes. Hearing this, the woman fell silent. After a long time, her voice slowly sounded in the cabin. Silly child, do you think you can prove that you're stronger than your brother by risking your life like this? Silly, you're really too silly. After hearing the woman's muttering, the man hesitated for a moment before carefully asking in a low voice, "Second, madam, why don't I send 2 men of sacrifice and to check it out?" Go in. The woman seemed to have heard a joke. After chuckling, she waved her hand with a tired face and then muttered in a low voice, "No need. Since the Tianshu Ruins is known as the Heavenly Venerable Forbidden Area, even if you send 2 Heavenly Venerables in, you'll just lose 2 lives in vain. Silly child, it's fine if you don't cherish your own life. As the head of the guards in the family, don't you understand this principle? This subordinate knows his mistake. All right, I'm tired. Let's go back." Yes. The man quickly walked out of the cabin. At this moment, the woman changed her face like a master of Sichuan opera. Her originally gentle and calm expression suddenly became extremely gloomy and fierce. She glanced coldly outside the window and muttered in a low voice with a gloomy face, "Huar, don't worry. If something happens to you, Mother will definitely bury the entire Xinyuan family with you." Chapter 468. After Qin Xueqing recovered a little, Chunshi was ready to depart with the two unlucky kids. However, just as they were about to leave, there was a small episode. The Americans, who didn't even see a shadow during the fight, saw that Chunshi had settled everything and was ready to leave. They eagerly sent a messenger to negotiate with him. The United States hoped that she could hand over Changhua and Yiji to them. In exchange, the United States were willing to provide Huaxia with some cutting-edge exoskeleton armor technology. After witnessing the power of the X-Class, how much did the United States want Changhua and Yiji? They were eager to dissect and study these two X-Class soldiers of unknown origin. They were even willing to give up years of research results in exchange. The United States had always been used to taking whatever they wanted. They only treated the world as their backyard. This time, they actually offered enough sincerity in exchange. How could Huaxia not be tempted? After all, in terms of cutting-edge technology research and development, Huaxia and the United States were at least 20 years apart. After hearing the instructions from the top, the Wu Yin executives nodded and agreed. But what no one expected was, after the order was passed to Qin Xueqing, Qinshi only used one word to send the messenger away. F***CK off. Qinshi's attitude was very bad. After the messenger heard this, he was as obedient as a grandson. He didn't even say a word and left on the spot. This kind of behavior really fit the old saying, these days, whoever has the biggest fist has the final say. Without the nuclear bomb as a trump card, the United States couldn't even deal with Changhua and Yiji. How would they dare to provoke Chun Shi, who easily captured the two brats? Therefore, the thousands of American soldiers could only wait obediently at the side and watch as Chun Shi and the others swaggered onto the cloud-piercing shuttle. Fuck! Ching! God damn it! In the battle command center, the colonel in charge of this battle was crazily smashing things. No wonder he was so angry. After all, not only did the target fly away, but the colonel also lost a complete rapid reaction force, causing him to become a commander without an army. No one would be able to swallow such an unlucky thing. However, other than screaming hysterically, what else could he do? Thinking of this, the colonel couldn't help but feel a sense of helplessness, and the appearance of the mysterious man was deeply imprinted in his heart. With Chun-Shi's massive energy as the driving force, the cloud-piercing shuttle finally showed Changhua and Yiji its true speed. In the blink of an eye, the cloud-piercing shuttle brought them back to Shanjing City. Ever since the two unlucky brats found out that Chun-Shi was at least a supreme martial artist, they behaved extremely obediently. They didn't make a fuss and just quietly knelt on the deck with their heads lowered. Needless to say, this submissive and sorrowful appearance really won the two of them the generous treatment of captives. Chun-Shi couldn't be bothered to deal with them personally. After temporarily sealing their cultivation, he directly handed them over to Qin Xueqing. Since the injuries on Qin Xueqing's body were caused by the two of them, whether he wanted to kill or torture them, he had to listen to the opinions of the victims first, right? Chun-Shi originally thought that with his sister-in-law's temper, she would kill the two of them on the spot to vent her anger. Who would have thought? After Qin Xueqing seriously considered it, she said with a serious face, "My martial cultivation has already reached a bottleneck. Right now, I need to continuously train myself through actual combat in order to successfully break through. Both of their cultivations are pretty good. They're very suitable for practice." After hearing this, Changhua and Yiji couldn't help but raise their heads and look at each other. Then, a trace of despair flashed across their eyes. Was she going to use them as human punching bags? It's over. Their future days would probably be worse than death. Qin Xueqing was injured and still needed to rest for a period of time to fully recover. Hence, Chun-Shi brought her back to the courtyard and instructed her not to run around before turning to leave. It was now 2:30 in the afternoon. There was still an hour and a half before Ninian school ended. It was rare that Qin Ruoying was in the mood today. Chun-Shi originally wanted to accompany Ying to walk around Summer Palace and cultivate their relationship so that he could climb into her bed as soon as possible. In the end, He was delayed by the two brats. Wasn't it already too late? She was very depressed. After finding Qin Ruoying through the road sign that he left on her body, he directly rushed towards Qin Ruoying's direction. Qin Ruoying did indeed go to Summer Palace. But when Shunshi arrived, she had already left the park and was alone in a taxi. HM, where's Ying going? Didn't we agree to wait for me to come back to find her? Logically speaking, Qin Ruoying would not run around. But Shunshi stood her up first. So even if Qin Ruoying was angry and ran around, it would still make sense. Now that Qin Ruoying had already gotten into the car, it was obviously inappropriate for Shunshi to appear to look for her. Thus, Shunshi could only follow behind the taxi, wanting to see where Ying was going. After getting into the car, Qin Ruoying sat in the back without saying a word. She quietly looked at the traffic outside the window. Shunshi secretly flew not far from the taxi, silently looking at the beautiful face that he yearned for day and night. The car continued to move forward in the rolling traffic, but the hustle and bustle of Shangjing City had nothing to do with them. Chapter 469. Between Heaven and Earth. Life is like a white steed passing by a crack, suddenly. After this matter, Shunshi and his family's life gradually returned to normal. The long river of time hurriedly passed by. In the blink of an eye, it was the end of the year. Today was February 3rd, the day before New Year's Eve. Although it was not yet a legal holiday, at this time, most of the migrant workers had already returned home. Without the support of the people at the bottom, the big Shangjing suddenly became deserted. There weren't many people in the first place, but today it was raining and snowing. As the cold wind blew, it gave the capital of the country a bleak feeling. Why was the new year feeling more and more faint? In recent years, housing prices had skyrocketed. So many people had to bear a huge mortgage because of this. People like Shunshi, who stood at the top of the pyramid and did not need to worry about their lives, were a minority. The general public still had to worry about their livelihood every day. Life was not easy. Even during the New Year holidays, most people hoped to be able to work overtime to earn a sum of money. After all, the New Year overtime pay was high, right? Under such great pressure, how could people show the usual heartfelt smile on their faces? Hohai Ice Rink was deserted, and the bars on the street were basically closed. In the past, they looked forward to the new year. Now, they were enduring the new year. Shunshi did not want the little girl to suddenly feel that the new year was the most boring time of the year when she thought about it many years later. Therefore, he used the New Year shopping and buying new clothes as an excuse to invite Qin Ruoying to go shopping together. Through careful observation during this time, Shunshi had already figured out Ying's current style of doing things. She did not care about anything, but she cared about the little girl. Therefore, as long as Shunshi used the little girl as an excuse and let the little girl act like a spoiled child on the side to assist him, there was a great possibility that he could persuade Qin Ruoying to go shopping with him. Although there were not many people on the street, there was a sea of people in the shopping mall. Nian hadn't been as happy as she was today since she started going to primary school. Although the little fellow's IQ was constantly improving, she was still young after all. So when she saw the children's air cushion toys in the middle of the mall, the little fellow couldn't wait to pull Shunshi and run over there. Although Nian was now the class leader and was incomparably awe-inspiring in class, she was still like an ordinary child in this inflatable castle. Even a simple inflatable slide could be played back and forth several times. The vigorous exercise soon made the little guy sweat profusely. She seemed to be very excited, and a bright smile hung on her rosy cheeks. Yongzhou City was brightly lit and full of colorful lights. The moment the white snake revealed its true form, the little fellow couldn't help but let out a cry of surprise. Although the story was still the same old story, after the movie ended, Shunshi didn't immediately get up and leave with his wife and daughter. Instead, he sat in his seat and silently reflected on it. He didn't expect that a random movie would coincidentally hit the soft spot in his heart. The movie might not be very good, but it happened to reflect the viewer's heart. The mountains and rivers are easy to shake. This feeling is like a chisel. 1,000 years in a glance, the love of the previous life. In particular, the sentence, "Thank you, husband," at the end of the Easter egg unintentionally and deeply touched Chen-Shi. That's right, for real lovers. A mere 500 years, what was the big deal? No matter where he is in the world, no matter what he looks like, no matter whether he remembers me or not, I have to find him, because I remember. This sentence was what Chen-Shi wanted to say the most. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but turn his head to look at Qin Ruoying next to him. Wasn't the face that had haunted his dreams right in front of him right now? He didn't know why, at that moment. Chen-Shi suddenly reached out for Qin Ruoying's hand, as if at the behest of gods and demons. It was warm and moist. Chen-Shi was stunned, because he just realized Ying didn't want to dodge. Chen-Shi couldn't help but feel a little surprised, so he subconsciously squeezed her soft and boneless hand, as if he wanted to make sure that he wasn't dreaming. There was no doubt that his behavior obviously annoyed Qin Ruoying on the spot. She snorted coldly and immediately stood up from her seat. Then, she carried the confused little fellow and quickly left. "Hey, Ying, wait for me." Chen-Shi didn't have enough fun, and Qin Ruoying turned hostile. Chen-Shi had no choice but to put on a bitter face and began to think about how to absolve himself of his rogue behavior. After that, he quickly walked out of the alley without batting an eyelid. It was the same as last time. After Jiang Yin walked out of the main street, Jiang Jingqing's figure suddenly appeared in front of him. However, it was different from last time. This time, before Jiang Jingqing could speak, Jiang Yin grabbed his arm and dragged him forward quickly. "What's wrong?" Jiang Jingqing was a little confused. Just as he was about to ask, Jiang Yin growled and stopped him. "Shut up, let's go." After saying that, Jiang Yin waved his sleeves and directly pulled Jiang Zhengqing away from Shang Jing as fast as he could. Jiang Yin dragged Jiang Zhengqing along for half an hour before finally coming to a stop. After that, Jiang Yin said to Jiang Zhengqing in a very serious tone, "I saw him." "Oh, what's the situation with him now?" "If it weren't for the news from the United States, I'm afraid we wouldn't even know that he's back." At this point, Jiang Zhengqing seemed to have thought of something and couldn't help but mutter in confusion. The news from Celestial Capital said that he fought with the 3 Celestial Venerables on Dragonhead Peak. Although he was severely injured, he was lucky enough to escape. Logically speaking, it's easier to go to heaven than to go to hell. If he didn't obtain the Soul Mirror, why would he suddenly return to Earth? The 9 Serenities information was passed down from Celestial Capital, so they were very clear about the situation when Chen-Shi and Yuhuan Tianzuan first fought. While Jiang Yin induced Chen-Shi to become enemies with Celestial Capital, he also led people to intercept and kill Wuxiu. Wasn't his goal to incite a war between Chen-Shi and Celestial Capital? He had achieved his goal. But what Jiang Yin didn't expect, even in his dreams, what happened next was completely beyond the scope of his imagination. When Chen-Shi fought with Yuhuan Tianzuan for the second time, not only did he capture the 10 Celestial Venerables in one fell swoop, but he also took the entire Great World with him. The once glorious Celestial Capital. Wasn't it just like a pile of mud that had been casually thrown into Saturn's ring? The 9 Serenities had no way of knowing all of this. However, although Jiang Yin didn't know what happened after that, the moment he saw Chen-Shi again, he already knew Mr. Chen was no longer in existence that the 9 Serenities could afford to provoke. Perhaps this was just his intuition, but Jiang Yin was willing to trust his intuition for once. Therefore, he didn't care what Jiang Zhengqing was muttering and directly ordered in an irrefutable tone. "In the name of the leader of the 9 Serenities, pass down this order. As long as Mr. Chen is still in Huaxia, all members of the 9 Serenities are prohibited from setting foot on Huaxia. If there are any violators, kill without mercy." I also wish your family's happiness, health, and wealth. Shi Chuanbai is here. I wish you all an early new year. Moi. 3. Chapter 472. February 4th, New Year's Eve. This day was always the busiest day in the courtyard. This was Nianyan's third New Year's Eve in the courtyard. Although last year's New Year's Eve was also very lively, without Chen Shi and Qin Roying, the house always felt like something was missing. So at that time, the little fellow's heart was inevitably a little empty and chatty. But fortunately, those were all in the past. This year's courtyard was much livelier than the year before. Early in the morning, the little fellow twisted the two brats and insisted that they play hide-and-seek with her in the courtyard. As a result, the two 16 or 17-year-old youths carefully followed behind the 6-year-old child, afraid that she would accidentally fall. Cheng Hua and Yi now understood. Wasn't the one with the highest status in this family the little fellow who looked like a porcelain doll in front of them? Since she was the daughter of the Supreme Being, then when she grew up, wouldn't she be in existence comparable to the divine sons and saintesses? The only thing that made the two of them feel a little strange was that Nianyan didn't have any signs of spiritual energy fluctuations on her body. If it weren't for the fact that she had several extraordinary treasures on her, perhaps the two of them might even have the idea of holding her hostage. Because of this, other people's children tempered their bodies at the age of 1 and built their foundation at the age of 3. However, when it came to Chen Shi, Nianyan was still like an ordinary child at the age of 6. He couldn't see anything different about her at all. Regarding this, Cheng Hua and Yi could only sigh silently in their hearts. The way the Supreme Being educated children was indeed not something that ordinary people like them could guess. New Year's Eve. It was nothing more than a reunion dinner, fireworks, and watching the Spring Festival Gala. Year after year, there really wasn't anything new to play with, so there was no need to go into detail here. The only thing worth noting was, perhaps it was because Nianyan was too young, so it was indeed difficult for her to get the excitement of the Spring Festival Gala. Therefore, after sitting for a short while, the little thing began to wander around the room, scratching its itch. Cheng Hua and Yi had never watched TV before. Therefore, from the moment the Spring Festival Gala started broadcasting, the two of them never looked away from the television. The more the others watched, the more bored Nianyan was to watch by the side. Thus, after the little thing rolled her big eyes around, she moved closer to Chen Shi and said coquettishly, "Daddy, I want to watch a movie." As soon as she finished speaking, she pursed her lips and deliberately put on an aggrieved look. Movie? Chen Shi was stunned for a moment. He looked up at the Spring Festival Gala skit that was playing on the TV and then looked down at the little fellow who was looking forward to it. He thought she wanted to watch cartoons, so he picked up the remote control and asked, "What do you want to watch? Daddy will give you some." However, after the little guy heard his words, he quickly shook his head and muttered unhappily, "I don't want to watch it at home. I want to go to the cinema. Let's watch a big movie." Some time ago, Whitesnake left a deep impression on the little fellow. He did not expect her to be addicted to watching movies because of it. Today is New Year's Eve. Everyone has gone home for the new year. I don't know if the cinema is open for business. Chen Shi would never refuse the little fellow's request. Therefore, after pinching the little fellow's nose, he smiled and took out his phone to check it out. According to his understanding, at this time, not to mention the cinema, even the barbecue stall would have to go home for the new year. However, what Chen Shi did not expect was it was the new year and the cinema was still open. Wandering Earth? Chen Shi looked at the movie schedule and found that many cinemas only had this one movie schedule. He handed the phone to the little fellow and let her decide whether she wanted to watch it or not. "Let's watch this. I want to watch Earth." The little fellow was not shy. After seeing the Earth on the movie poster, she immediately twisted Chen Shi excitedly and shouted loudly, "Okay, let's watch this then." As he spoke, Chen Shi gently patted the little fellow. This was an exclusive secret signal between the father and daughter. After all, in this family, the father did not have the final say. It was the mother's approval that counted. After the little fellow received the order, she immediately went to Qin Ruiying's side and then began to act coquettishly with her. "Mom, I want to watch a movie. Take me to the movie." "Okay, okay." In this regard, Qin Ruiying agreed very quickly. Almost without hesitation, she nodded gently. After receiving the official's approval, the family of three set off in the middle of the night. Naturally, Cheng Hua and Yi Ji accompanied them. Of course, the two of them were not really curious about the movie. The reason why they followed Chen Shi out in a panic was purely to avoid sitting under the same roof as Qin Shueqing. It could be seen that the two of them were traumatized by their sister-in-law. There was not a single soul on the streets, but the movie theater was full of people and was very lively. The audience had great expectations for Wandering Planet, which was known as the sci-fi masterpiece of Huaxia. It had to be said that the Huaxia audience's tolerance was indeed very high. No matter how bad the movie was, as long as a few celebrities were involved, they could earn back the box office no matter what. The audience had long been scared of being deceived, so when they bought tickets, they were a little nervous. They were afraid that they would accidentally fall into the trap of a trashy director. Fortunately, it was not a scam this time. It was finally worth the ticket price. Didn't Cheng Hua and Yi Ji just pass by Jupiter a while ago? Therefore, when the two of them saw the realistic and spectacular special effects on the big screen, they were immediately shocked by everything in front of them. Yi Ji, is this the entertainment method of a low-level technological civilization? It seems to be very different from what we imagined. Well, it seems that a low-level technological civilization is not without merit. Even if there is no supreme existence like Mr. Chen, with the accumulation of their own civilization, they would probably be able to control the entire Tianshu ruins within 1,000 years. While watching the movie, the two of them secretly communicated with their divine senses. It was only at this time that the two of them could speak freely and say what they were thinking. The two of them only thought that they could use a secret technique to block Chun-Shi's perception, but they did not think that, since they could use a secret technique to block Chun-Shi's perception, how could Chun-Shi not use a secret technique to eavesdrop on their conversation? Supreme Palace Enclosure. Unlike Earth, the Supreme Palace Enclosure was not spherical. Instead, it was a continental plate floating in the universe. At the end of the land was the universe. This was the so-called square sky and square Earth. In addition, an existence similar to the Supreme Palace Enclosure was actually very common in the universe. When Chun-Shi was in the heavenly Jade Realm, he had once been in charge of a sacred cultivation ground similar to the Supreme Palace Enclosure. That was why he was given the title of Divine Lord. Divine Lord Chun-Shi was the actual ruler of this sacred ground. Therefore, sometimes one only needed to directly judge the level of a sacred ground based on a ruler's title. Sacred cultivation grounds were also divided into good and bad. Among them, the best was naturally a mother planet like the heavenly Jade Realm that could continuously produce spirit chi of heaven and earth. A little lower was the current Earth, which was the Tianshu ruins that Cheng Hua and Yi Ji spoke of. Next was the Supreme Palace Enclosure. Just like the Great World, the Supreme Palace Enclosure itself was not a planet. Therefore, no matter how prosperous it was now, it would inevitably fall into desolation one day, just like Earth when its spirit chi was exhausted. The day the spirit chi was exhausted was the moment the Supreme Palace Enclosure welcomed the arrival of Doomsday. Of course, this process of exhaustion usually took tens of thousands of years, so there was no need to worry too early. The reason was very simple. Chapter 473. The movie was pretty good. At least the little girl didn't fall asleep. After watching the movie, she even excitedly twisted around Chun-Shi and said, "Daddy, space is so beautiful. When are you going to bring me to pick the stars?" In response, Chun-Shi didn't just brush her off. Instead, he told her seriously, when she turned 18, he would definitely fulfill his promise and bring her to pick the stars and the moon in space. Daddy is the best. Could this promise be fulfilled? For the little girl, this wasn't important at all. In reality, She just wanted to hear her father make a promise to her seriously. Every time this happened, her face would naturally reveal a pure smile that could melt a person's heart. She was happy because her father agreed to her request. The little girl was extremely happy, but Cheng Hua and Yi Ji were like mute people who had eaten Chinese medicine. They felt bitter and frustrated. After all, a good cloud-piercing shuttle was stolen just like that. Anyone would be depressed, right? This movie was 2 hours long, so when Chun Shi and his family left the theater, it was already 2 in the morning. February 5th, early morning. A new year had quietly arrived. The little girl yawned, and then laid on Chun Shi's shoulder like a koala bear. She soon fell asleep. Hearing the sound of steady breathing, Chun Shi couldn't help but reveal a faint smile on his face. The wind on the street was very light. It was as if everything was silent. Shangjing, known as the city that never sleeps, finally quieted down. Only the roar of cars could be heard from time to time, telling the passers-by about the city's past glory. This New Year's Eve was still considered perfect and happy. At the beginning of the new year, everything was renewed. After the bustling new year, the little girl started her school life again. Once the child went to school, the parents naturally had more free time. Chun Shi originally planned to go back to his old business, but without a capable manager like Xiao Yuan, he didn't want to waste time and effort running the tea house, so he just closed it. Now, other than sending Nian Yin to and from school every day, Chun Shi didn't have a reason to go out anymore. Therefore, he stayed at home all day thinking about how to win over his wife. Although he said he was trying to win over her, he was actually strolling around with Qin Ruoying every day. Today, they strolled from the west gate to the east gate. Tomorrow, they strolled from the south gate to the north gate. They really went through every nook and cranny of Shangjing. During this time, it wasn't that Chun Shi didn't think about how to retrieve Ying Ying's memories. But the soul mirror was like a dead phone. No matter what Chun Shi did, she couldn't activate it. Chun Shi had no choice but to make a trip to Saturn's ring and conduct a friendly interview with Heavenly Venerable Yuhuan. One had to know that the Oat Nebula was like an eggshell. It included the entire solar system. So how big was its volume? Compared to it, the young girl was so small that she could be ignored. So even if she used the voice transmission secret method, how far could her shout be transmitted? The young girl was extremely scared. She kept shouting, but there was no response from the forbidden area. No, Brother Dongfang will be fine. After shouting continuously for about 4 to 5 hours, the young girl finally despaired. In fact, from the moment she heard the news, she was already in despair. The reason why she still came here was to use facts to convince herself and to shatter the last trace of fantasy in her heart. Brother Dongfang, you said you would wait for me to grow up. You said you would marry me, the young girl cried out in despair. Bean-sized teardrops continued to slide down her cheeks. Coupled with her beautiful and lovely appearance, the ignorant young girl in front of him gave off a poignant feeling like a pear blossom in the rain. Young people didn't understand love and were always the most infatuated. In fact, it was only at the age when one didn't understand love that one could love someone to death. You said you would marry me. After muttering this sentence a few times, the young girl finally seemed to have made an important decision. She gently wiped away the tears on her face. Then, a bright smile appeared on her face. Brother Dongfang, I'm coming for you. Wait for me. After speaking, the young girl closed her eyes and drove the Xingcha to the Oat Nebula at full speed. Jiutian Divine Emperor. Since she was fine, it meant the Tianshu ruins were not as dangerous as the legend said. Perhaps Big Brother Dongfang had already explored it. The girl instinctively wanted to chase after him. However, after thinking about it for a while, she suddenly turned the ship around and rushed back to the Oat Nebula. This place is too big. If I want to rely on my own strength to find Brother Dongfang, this is tantamount to looking for a needle in a haystack. No, I have to bring this news back. Unlike Cheng Hua's recklessness and greed, The young girl did not care about the final ownership of the W ruins. Therefore, when she confirmed that the Tianshu ruins were not dangerous, she wanted to bring this news back as soon as possible so that more people could help her find her brother Dongfang. While the girl hurried back to the Supreme Palace enclosure, Chunshi was not idle either. He arranged the Tiandu group on the dark side of the moon. Therefore, from this moment on, Tiandu was really floating in the sky. The thing to note here was, because while the moon revolved around the Earth, the moon itself was also rotating. In addition, its rotation period was the same as its rotation period. So no matter where you stood on the Earth and looked up at the sky, humans would always only see one side of the moon. As for the other side that could not be seen, it was called the dark side of the moon. In order to prevent Yuhuan Tianzuan from sneaking to the Earth, Chunshi also set up a large ceiling formation on the dark side of the moon. There was still a lot of high-end combat power in Tiandu. If they combined their strength, they might be able to break this formation by force. However, this place was too close to the Earth. Even if Yuhuan Tianzuan wanted to break the formation by force, Chunshi could immediately rush over to stop him. Therefore, after setting up the formation, Chunshi was completely relieved. At this time, Yuhuan Tianzuan seemed to have accepted his fate. Ever since the collapse of the big world, causing Tiandu to be forcibly relocated to the solar system, Yuhuan Tianzuan was like a defeated rooster. He was dejected all day long and was no longer as elegant as before. It stood to reason that a proud person like Yuhuan Tianzuan would not completely lose his fighting spirit because of one failure. Chunshi guessed that there must be some secret. Therefore, he arranged for the Tiandu group to be on the moon. After fulfilling his promise that he would treat the remnants of Tiandu well, he took the soul mirror and talked to Yuhuan Tianzuan again. Chunshi was prepared to extort a confession by torture, but he did not expect. Yuhuan Tianzuan was much more straightforward than he thought. Perhaps Chunshi was overthinking, but in short, he felt that Yuhuan Tianzuan was not too hostile to him now. Instead, he seemed to have a lot to say to him. Mutual appreciation? I'm afraid not. The two flew side by side to a nearby ring-shaped mountaintop. Looking at the sparkling blue planet not far away, Yuhuan Tianzuan's tone was no longer as overbearing as before. Instead, there was an inexplicable sense of desolation. It turned out that, as early as 10,000 years ago, the Tai Ching ancestor left a prophecy that Tiandu would be destroyed one day. At that time, only the soul mirror could ensure that Tiandu's incense would continue to burn and pass down. In this regard, the 10 celestial lords of Tiandu naturally believed in it. It was precisely because of this that when Yuhuan Tianzuan learned that the spiritual qi of the lower realm had begun to recover, he began a plan to build a soul bridge and lead everyone back to Earth. The ancient immortal cultivators were forced to leave Earth, so it was natural for them to return now. Everything should have gone according to plan. Unfortunately, Chunshi's appearance caused Yuhuan Tianzuan to be forced to activate the Sun-Moon-Star Array, and everything that happened afterward completely refreshed his worldview. It wasn't until the moment the 9 stars aligned that Yuhuan Tianzuan suddenly realized things were not as simple as the previous celestial lords had imagined. The Tai Ching ancestor must have hidden some shocking secret. In fact, there weren't many records of the soul mirror and the Sun-Moon-Star Array in the ancient books left behind by the great ancestor. Even an outsider like Chun, she could see the extraordinariness of the Sun-Moon-Star Array at a glance. How could the previous celestial lords of Tiandu not see through it? Therefore, the previous celestial lords all thought that the Sun-Moon-Star Array was the last life-saving straw that the Tai Ching ancestor had prepared for Tiandu. Who would have thought? The price of activating the array was so painful. Could this be the so-called trump card? Without needing the enemy to make a move, he would first destroy the foundation? During this period of time, Yuhuan Tianzuan had been thinking about why the Tai Ching ancestor would make such an arrangement. Combined with the ancient records that he had read in the Imperial Hall, coupled with his own personal experience, Yuhuan Tianzuan suddenly remembered a terrifying rumor that had been circulating since ancient times. The content of the rumor was actually very simple. That was, The reason why the Tai Ching ancestor led the ancient immortal cultivators to the great world to establish Tiandu was not to save the common people from suffering, but to satisfy his own selfish desires. This Tai Ching ancestor, who was regarded as a god by the ancient immortal cultivators, in fact, he was a despicable person who pretended to be righteous. The holiday is over. The new year has begun. I will strive to write more words. At the same time, I wish everyone good luck in the coming year and get promoted and rich as soon as possible. Chapter 475. The Divine Ancestor had once said that when Tiandu was in danger, the formation could be activated to ensure the continuation of Tiandu's inheritance. Although the Sun-Moon Star formation was very powerful, the most crucial part of it was obviously that seemingly useless Khanate supreme treasure, the sky-bearing mirror of floating dawn. In addition, there were many different opinions about the origin of this Khanate supreme treasure within Tiandu. Some said it was the Divine Ancestor's natal magic treasure, while others said it was inadvertently found in the depths of the void. As for which was true and which was false, perhaps only the Divine Ancestor himself knew. Successive celestial venerables had carefully studied the soul mirror, but no one could discover any secrets from it. Over time, this Khanate supreme treasure was completely reduced to a useless decoration. Yuhuan Tianzin was ambitious and naturally would not easily believe that the soul mirror was useless. From the day he became a celestial venerable, he had been constantly thinking about how to take the soul mirror for his own use. In order to achieve this goal, Yuhuan Tianzin had even flipped through all the ancient records related to the Divine Ancestor. In addition to some obviously official biographies, he had even searched for many unofficial histories from the people. Thus, Yuhuan Tianzin gradually understood some of the secrets of the ancient times. What needed to be mentioned here was that as long as there was political power, there would inevitably be opponents. Tiandu was no exception. The Divine Ancestor was not a national treasure and could not be liked by everyone. So it was inevitable that there would be some thieves with evil intentions spreading rumors to slander the Divine Ancestor. It was from these traitors that Yuhuan Tianzin had obtained this unofficial history that was close to a rumor. According to the unofficial records, the Divine Ancestor was not as glorious and great as people imagined. Instead, he was an out-and-out hypocrite, 10,000 times more disgusting than Mount Hua. History was always written by the victors. 10,000 years had passed. So how much of the past could the people of later generations remember? Wasn't it still just reading the ancient records left behind by the predecessors? In the official history, the Divine Ancestor's greatness did not need to be repeated because he had long become a god worshipped by everyone in Tiandu. But in this unofficial history, the image of the grand pure Divine Ancestor was completely different from what everyone knew before. Even if his cultivation was unparalleled, he still had the heart of 5 poisons that everyone had: greed, anger, stupidity, hesitation, and doubt. It was precisely because of this that the grand pure one in the unofficial history was no longer a flawless ancient myth. Instead, he was more like a living person. The name of the sect that the Grand Pure One Sacred Ancestor belonged to was no longer known, but there was no doubt that the Earth of that era was indeed very powerful, far surpassing the current Tianxian. Of course, the Earth at that time wasn't called Earth, but was called W Realm. In short, it was an era where heroes came forth in large numbers. If it wasn't for the sudden depletion of the spirit chi of heaven and earth, there probably wouldn't be any modern humans. Logically speaking, since the ancestor of the Jiang clan and the Grand Pure One Sacred Ancestor were fellow disciples, how could his descendants be labeled as sinners by the Sacred Ancestor? There must be some secret hidden within, but this jade slip didn't record it in detail. Other than some meaningless slander, Chunshi couldn't find a single useful piece of information. This kind of feeling was like someone exposing a celebrity's scandals on the internet. No matter what the rumor mongers said, How could they convince people without concrete evidence? Chun-Shi held the jade slip in his hand and rubbed it carefully, as if he was thinking about something. One had to know that jade slips had always been used to record important information. How could they only record some baseless slander? In the words of the netizens, that was, how could there be no real evidence? Thinking of this, Chun-Shi couldn't help but pour his divine sense into the jade slip again and try to find some useful information from it. This time, he looked very carefully. He carefully studied the jade slip from the inside to the outside. And it was precisely because of this that Chun-Shi actually managed to find a seal in this seemingly ordinary jade slip. This seal was very strange. It actually contained some of the true meaning of the word void, so that others couldn't discover its existence at all. In other words, only cultivators at the Dongxi realm could successfully read its contents. Yuhuan Tianzun's cultivation was only at the mid-deity transformation stage, so even if the jade slip had been in his hands all this time, he didn't know that there were other contents hidden in the jade slip. Therefore, the moment Chun-Shi discovered this seal, he already realized what he was about to uncover could be a shocking secret that had been covered in dust for tens of thousands of years. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.